Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Robb the Thief. Robb was proud of his army as they marched into position. He, a young man who had not even reached 20 name days, had united 4 of the 7 kingdoms under one banner, and now led a significant portion of them into battle against possibly the most dangerous man in Westeros. Unfortunately, pride wasn't all that Robb was feeling. It felt like stone butterflies littered his stomach, an unpleasant experience for the young king as he faced the opposing force arrayed in front of him. Tywin had set his men in a similar formation as Robb, with infantry and archers in the center, and his cavalry protecting the flanks. There was a heavier presence of knights on his eastern side, but Robb knew that it was to prevent the flank from being turned. Both commanders knew that, should the Stark host prove able to pin the Lannister army against the lake, then all hope is lost. "My lord, the men are in position," a messenger said, reining his horse in as he approached the northern king. Robb turned to his hornblower. "Sound the advance," he ordered. The barrel-chested man nodded and wet his lips before bringing up the horn and blew an ascending scale of notes. Almost as one, Robb's army began to move forward. The sound of their boots tramping, along with the jingle of armor and weapons, was deafening to the young commander who had never been in a pitched battle before. All his battles to this point had been brilliantly planned surprise attacks. His father had taught Jon and him how to conduct pitched battles, but there was a difference between moving pieces on a board and commanding mortal men. Horns went up along the Lannister line as the mass of scarlet and gold began to move forward as well. When both armies were in range, archers began raining arrows down on the infantry, with mixed results coming from both sides. Robb's front lines were entirely composed of Stormlander levies, some of the toughest men he had ever seen. They trooped stubbornly through the arrow storm towards the Lannisters, who were also doing their best to shrug off the projectiles flying all around them. In a giant clash of metal and bodies, the two fronts came together and began to shove each other, a battle of will and strength emerging in the center. On the flanks, the two cavalry hosts slammed each other as well. The only way Robb would ever be able to describe the mass of humanity in front of him would be by saying that it looked like two bulls fighting for dominance. Robb turned to Loras, who was watching the battle with a pale but firm look on his face. He was once again armored in his ornate silver armor, and helm decorated with golden roses. He had a heater shield strapped to his saddle, and his sword was still sheathed at his side, though the young knight was gripping the hilt with all his might. "Sir Loras, now is the time," he ordered. The young knight nodded quickly and rode off back towards the north. Robb had added a small wrinkle to his battle plan that morning, placing 1,000 mounted knights some ways away from the battle on the King's Road. The plan was to have Loras take command and have them charge into Tywin's flank from the east in an effort to turn the enemy army. It would take the young knight time to reach them and for the column to reach the actual battle. Hopefully Tywin's forces would be worn out and unprepared for a cavalry charge. "Send word to Blackwood that I need arrow fire on the eastern flank," Robb said, giving orders to a messenger. The man nodded and clapped his heels into the flanks of his mount, galloping off towards where the archers were drawn up. Robb surveyed the battlefield, an impatient itch annoying him. He knew he had to be patient and to let the battle play out, but the lack of anything happening got at him. He expected Tywin to have something up his sleeve, some trick or game to throw at Robb, but so far he had revealed nothing. Something in Robb's gut told him that something was coming. He just didn't know what. Tywin. The old lion watched impassively as his army fought hard to hold back the Stark host. They were fresh and well-fed compared to Tywin's own army that was hanging on to their last reserves of food, water, and will. Lord Bainafort sat mounted next to his liege lord, an old and experienced veteran who had served under Tywin many times. With Kevin away on the eastern flank holding off the Tyrells, Bainafort became Tywin's right-hand man. "Those Stormlanders are fighting something fierce," the older man said grimly, leaning forward in his saddle to get a better look at the front lines. Tywin couldn't help but agree. His men were experienced soldiers one and all, but Stormlander levies were some of the best in the 7 kingdoms, and they were showing their worth now as they slowly moved through Tywin's front ranks. Not even the archers, who were the cream of the crop from the Westerlands, seemed to be giving the southern warriors any trouble. "My lord, a lone rider has left Stark's command center," a messenger replied breathlessly. A certain light gleamed in the old man's eye. "Send word to Prince Oberyn. He will know what to do," he ordered, dismissing the man. When the rider was gone, Lord Banefort glanced towards his liege lord. "Do you think that Dornishman will keep his word?" he asked quietly. Tywin clenched his jaw. "Oberyn Martell will keep to his word. It's the only way his family can have what they want. A chance to sit on the Iron Throne." Lord Banefort didn't feel as confident as his liege, but he held his tongue. If Tywin was willing to risk his legacy, for this was what this battle was, then who was he to argue? The old lion had never let his bannermen down before. The two veterans watched as the battle raged in front of them, each host pushing against each other in a great battle of strength and will. Unfortunately for the lords of Casterly Rock and Banefort, the Stormlander levies were proving to be too much for the weary Westermen. They were also backed up by a small host of Northmen, given their chainmail and boiled leather armor. No doubt battle-hardened soldiers that had been with the Stark boys since the onset of the war. They were the steel backbone of the infantry. "My lord, our arrows are running thin," a messenger called, riding up to Tywin. "Lord Marbrand is asking for any archer you can spare." "Lord Marbrand will continue as he is," Tywin barked, glaring at the man. "Reinforcements will be arriving soon. Tell him that he is not to disturb me anymore." The rider paled, but nodded, riding off back the way he came. Tywin turned his glare back towards the battle, where the Stark host seemed to be getting the upper hand against the Lannister army. "Send word to Sarag Rhaegar." Tywin snapped to a nearby messenger. The rider nodded and clapped his heels into his mount, spurring it towards the ruined castle in the distance. It was time for the old lion to show his claws.
Robb.
After hours of fighting, Robb finally saw that his men were taking the upper hand in the fight. It was a good sight for the young king, especially since Sir Loras was close with his knights. Just as the thought entered Robb's mind, the Knight of Flowers and his 1,000-strong company came galloping down the road, their steel armor shining in the sun. With spectacular discipline, the armored wedge swung east before swinging back west, now pointed at the Lannisters' unprotected flank. Like an arrow sinking into a target, the wedge of knights slammed into the Lannister cavalry, penetrating deep into the ranks of red and gold. The enemy wavered slightly under the onslaught, but they seemed to retreat and rally, trying to keep their enemy in front of them. "Your Grace," Brienne cried, pointing towards Harrenhal, where a group of cavalry had suddenly emerged and was charging full pelt towards Robb's flank, where Lord Caron was slowly pushing the enemy back into their own infantry. The massive figure at the head of the group told Robb all he needed to know about who was leading the group. It was the Mountain, Tywin's mad dog and his pack of equally cruel and sadistic raiders. "Perwyn, take 1,000 men from the reserve and march to Lord Caron's aid," Robb quickly ordered. The Frey Knight nodded and rode off to follow his king's order. "Will that be enough?" Small John asked, he and Daisy riding up to Robb. "It'll have to," Robb said grimly, annoyed that he had been caught by surprise. He didn't think that Tywin would attack Robb from the west. He's trying to cause casualties, and Gregor fucking Clegane can do that better than anyone. He knows he can't win and is going down fighting. Small John and Daisy nodded, falling back in line behind their king with the rest of their group. For the next hour, Robb watched the battle unfold before him. His left flank and center were still going strong, pushing the Lannister back slowly and surely. His right flank was still a bit of a mess, but Caron was regaining control now that Ser Perwyn and his infantry had moved forward to restore order. Robb had been tempted to throw his reserves into the battle to try and end the fight, but he knew that it would be a folly. His father had taught him to be patient in battle, and to try and think as his opponent would. That's what Robb had done so far in the war, and it's worked out well for him. He would not abandon such sound logic now. "My lord, Sardemo reports that the Lannister center is close to breaking," a messenger called, riding up to Robb. He requests that the archers focus their full attention on the infantry. Robb glanced at his left before nodding. "Request granted," he answered firmly. "Ride to Lord Blackwood and tell him." The rider nodded and rode off. For another hour, Robb and his friends waited and watched as the battle raged before them. By now, the death and carnage that they witnessed had dulled their emotions and calmed their senses. When the battle had started, a few had paled at the sight of death, but they had since steadied their hearts and had firm control of their fear. Sire, what is that? Sarah Balin asked, pointing an armored hand towards the southeast, where a large dust cloud had formed. Robb frowned, leaned forward in the saddle, as he tried to figure out what had created the dust cloud. Whatever it was, it had to be large. Surely it couldn't be the Lannisters. From Robb's understanding, all of Tywin's host was now a part of the fray. It's the Martells, Septa Balin gasped, shocked. Robb turned to him. Are you sure? The knight nodded quickly. I see their banner clear as day. It's all cavalry. There have to be thousands of them. Surely they are here to help us. The Sargarth Hightower interrupted. Prince Doran and his family loathe all Lantis. A terrible feeling filled Robb's gut, one that he had felt weeks ago when he was in the Reach with Renly the night the Baratheon brother had died in front of him. It was a feeling of fear and uncertainty, not something that Robb felt often. He felt it again now, far stronger than when he had at the start of the battle. The group of warriors watched shocked and outraged as the massive host of Dornish cavalry smashed into Robb's left flank, quickly buckling and breaking the cavalry there, and sending them retreating into their infantry, destroying their soon-to-be victory against the Lannister foot. Now the Lannister cavalry added their depleted might to their newly arrived allies, driving Robb's host west towards the lake. What Robb had hoped to do to Tywin's army was now happening to his own, faster than the young king could keep up with. Sound the retreat, Robb roared, trying to keep his anger and fear out of his voice, as his mighty host was quickly being cut to pieces. Retreat west. The remaining messengers around the king quickly rode off, sounding their horns and calling for their comrades to flee west. Robb stayed where he was for a moment longer, glaring at the giant lion standard that flew behind the Lannister vanguard, where Tywin no doubt was. The old lion had surprised him, and it had cost Robb dearly. It made the young man angrier than words could describe. This isn't over, he growled to himself. Your Grace, Brienne yelled. We must go. Robb growled and pointed his mount west. Greywind, he shouted, as he spurred his horse forward, his guards quickly surrounding him, hands gripping weapons as they readied themselves to protect their king. Tywin, the Lord of Casterly Rock, watched with satisfaction as his plan worked to perfection. The Dornish cavalry swept in from the east like a flood, scything through the Stark bannermen, leaving hundreds of bodies in their wake. Well, almost perfection. Instead of trying to rally his men, the Stark boy had quickly sounded the general retreat, and would no doubt save more of his men from being cut down by the Dornish cavalry. It was a safe, smart play by the boy, but he would still lose thousands, if not tens of thousands of men to Prince Oberyn and his Dornish riders. My lord, we have victory, Kevin said happily as he rode up to his brother. The Stark host is retreating. Send Clegane and our cavalry after him, Tywin ordered, not acknowledging his brother. We have to keep them on the run, and not allow them to regroup. Kevin nodded to a nearby messenger, who nodded back and rode off to the west, where the mountain that rides was still slaughtering all around him. Protected the thickest set of armor ever made. The knight stood out like, well, a mountain among the other mounted men around him. Kevin did not like the man. There was undoubtedly something unhinged about him, but Tywin loved him. He was his hammer, his mad dog, his strong and unforgiving hand. Prince Oberyn kept to his word, Kevin said, removing his helm and wiping his forehead. The older knight had taken a small part in the fighting, when the Terrell Knight and his company of cavalry had slammed into his flank. Thankfully, he had been able to pull his host into itself, keeping the enemy held in place until the Dornish had arrived. The rest of his host, now under the command of a knight that had spent years in Kevin's service, was helping the Dornish cavalry sweep up the rest of the Stark infantry. As I said, Tywin replied, his eyes still trained on one of the few remaining pockets of resistance that were being quickly and savagely put down. The Dornish only want one thing, power. It's what they have always wanted. I gave them enough to sate their thirst for now. And what if they want more? Kevin asked. They won't want for more till after this war is over. Tywin answered, when this war is over, so is their usefulness. How can you know this? Tywin glanced at his brother. I spent decades in court, brother, he said coldly. This is what happens. Always. Kevin sighed quietly and bowed his head, dropping the discussion. The older knight then realized how tired he was. He was no longer a young man, not like when he and Tywin had marched off to fight in the War of the Ninepenny Kings. He was old now, and like his brother, this would be his last war. And from the looks of the battlefield, it would end with a hard-won victory. Send word to all commanders that we will regroup at Harrenhal tonight, Tywin ordered, gathering his reins in his hands. Kevin nodded. It will be done, my lord. And with that, Tywin rode off, leaving his brother behind, tired but victorious. Jon 17. Jon cleaned his blade with a cloth that he had found on the tables in the Hall of the Twins. He wasn't covered in a lot of gore, unlike some of the men that fought with Lord Hawker. Whoever had been in command of the defenses had been smart, placing the majority of his men in the Western Keep. Unfortunately, that had been the undoing of the Freys when Jon and the Blackfish had stormed the Eastern Keep, sweeping aside the weak resistance they met and taking most of the members of House Frey prisoner before anyone in the other keep had time to realize what was happening. Sarah Bryndon's plan had gone off without a hitch. They had managed to find the ford and cross it the evening before the battle. Their attack on the eastern gate had also gone perfectly. There had been a few weak points on the gate where the metal met the stonework. Those had been the first to come loose before the rest of the portcullis was torn from its fittings. Just after Satry Hawker shot off a signal arrow is when all hell broke loose. Glover and Mormont took the majority of the men and began to clear out the castle. They had orders not to give any leniency to free soldiers that they found, only to women and children. While they accomplished that, Jon, Sarah Bryndon, and a handful of knights went directly to the main hall where they found an irate Lord Frey. Jon would remember the brief conversation and fight for a long time. Line break. Jon and Sarah Bryndon burst through the double doors, cutting down the few Frey guards who had been huddled on the other side. Lord Frey was sat at his usual spot at the head of the table, his last remaining sons standing just in front of him, their weapons shaking in their hands. What is the meaning of this? Walder roared weakly before a coughing fit gripped the old man, taking much of the bite out of his bark. Walder Frey, you are charged with treason, Sir Bryndon said fiercely. I will give you one chance to surrender and end this fight before more of your men die. The old lord of the crossing slammed his hand on the table, his face mottled red and purple, with rage. Never. Sir Bryndon led the charge into the last remaining defenders, protecting the lord of the crossing. It wasn't even a challenge for the old knight and the northern bastard. Together they cut down half the group while the rest turned and ran, abandoning their lord. Cowards! Traitors! Walder bellowed. For the first time, the old lord was showing a little fear. As Bryndon and Jon approached him, their blades slick with blood. Sir Leon, take this traitor and throw him in the dungeon. Sarah Bryndon ordered. I demand trial by combat. Walder threw out suddenly, holding his hands in front of his face. Trial by combat is reserved for nobles on trial, Bryndon growled. You and yours have been stripped of any such luxury. He turned to Jon. Jon, what would King Robb do? He asked. Jon glared at the old lord. My brother would behead him. He spat. It was at that moment Walder Frey lost control of his bladder, soiling himself as he began to sob fearfully. It was a pitiful sight, the once mighty and arrogant Lord of the Crossing, reduced to a soiled, sobbing wreck of a man. His crimes are against House Stark, Jon continued. Even though I am no Stark, King Robb is still my brother. I will swing the sword. Sir Bryndon nodded firmly, not arguing with the younger man. He will be executed in the morning. Now get this sorry mess out of my sight. Lane break. After Walder Frey had been dragged off, Lord Glover had led more cavalry across the bridge and pinned the last defenders between himself and Lord Hawker's men. Once the gate of the western keep was opened, most of the defenders knew that the fight was up. Some tried to surrender, others fought to the last, and a few even threw themselves into the river, forgetting that they were wearing mail shirts and had metal helms strapped to their head. Their death was a lot slower, and probably a hell of a lot more painful. Now Jon sat outside the eastern gate, on the leg that would be used for Lord Frey's execution. Ghost was at his side, his mouth still colored red from last night's battle. He had particular useful in finding the ford as it had been hidden by a grove of trees. Jon, Sir Bryndon called, walking up to the northern bastard, flanked by the rest of the war council. They all still wore their armor and were sporting blood and bruises from the fight. No doubt the Great Jon had already boasted about how he got some of his war wounds. Sir Bryndon, are we ready? Jon asked, standing up. The older knight nodded. He's being brought up now. Walder Frey looked no better than he had when Jon had seen him last. His long, thick robes were stained with piss and dirt. The old man's face was haggard and sagging, his eyes still red with tears and his nose was running profusely. He looked like shit, plain and simple. Jon gestured for the two Tully men to put Walder's neck on the block as he took his spot, planting frost in the ground in front of him. The northern lords who had seen Eddard Stark execute someone would say, at that moment, Jon looked like a young Ned Stark. The way he held himself, his sword, the look in his eye, there was no doubt the boy was a Stark. Walder Frey, you are charged with treason against King Robb, king in the north and of the Riverlands, Stormlands and Reach. Do you have any final words? Jon asked, his voice heard clearly by all present for the execution. Please, please don't kill me. Frey whimpered weakly. Please, I'll do anything. Jon frowned. You made your bed, Frey. Now you must lie in it, he said firmly. I, Jon Snow, brother to his grace, King Robb Stark, sentence you to die. The stroke was clean and strong, taking the old man's head off in a single cut, but in Frey fashion, Walder couldn't even die cleanly, voiding his bowels just before his head was taken from his shoulders. Put a head on a spike and place outside this gate. Sarah Brynden ordered. Throw the body in the river. The guards nodded and bowed, grabbing the headless body and head, and taking them away, leaving the nobles alone to talk. That was well done, lad, the Greyjoy praised, laying a surprisingly gentle hand on Jon's shoulders. Ned would be proud. As would your brother, Glover added. Jon nodded to them. Thank you, my lords. Walder Frey's transgressions were against House Stark. I gave the sentence and I swung the sword. I must admit that is the first time I've seen northern justice. Edmure mused. It's quite honorable. It's a northern tradition, Lady Meg explained gruffly. If you're strong enough to condemn a man to death, then you are strong enough to swing the sword and hear his final words. Well said, my lady, Lord Mallister praised. Now, what will be done with this place? He asked, gesturing to the twins. I will leave a castellan in place when we march south to join his grace, Sarah Brynden said. As for what will happen to it, that will be left up for King Robb to decide. What of the rest of the Frits? Jon asked. While Walder had been killed, and most of his sons were in the north with the Boltons, that still left dozens of children and women from Walder's many marriages. They had all been confined to the main hall. They will be kept here until the end of the war. Ser Brynden answered. Then, the women and their children will be sent home to their mother's family. Those who are unwed shall be sent to a convent to join the faith, or silent sisters. Any young man who is unmarried shall either be sent to the wall, the faith, or the citadel. How many did we lose? Lord Blackwood asked. 2,000 foot, Edmure answered grimly. Mostly those under Lord Hawker's command. Do we know how his grace fared against Tywin? Lord Corstark asked. I have not received any riders or ravens, Brynden answered. Once the twins are secured, then I plan to march south towards Harrenhal. The old knight looked around. If that is all, my lords, I am sure you all have things to do. As the nobles began to disperse, Sarah Brynden pulled Jon to the side, making sure no one is within earshot. Jon, he said, I want to wish you luck as you travel north. Jon shifted. He had grown used to seeing Brynden as a grim, brutally honest man. He was unused to seeing a softer side of the man like he was now. It made him slightly uncomfortable. Thank you, Sarah Brynden. I wish the same for you when you march south to join Robb, Jon responded. Brynden nodded. I wasn't sure what to make of you when you arrived. You have shown that you are brave, fearless, and smarter than some might give you credit, though I expect nothing less from the son of Ned Stark. He hesitated before continuing. I wanted to give you some last-minute advice for when you face Bolton. Jon wasn't sure what to say, so he simply nodded. As we both know, Bolton will not fight fair. He will cheat, lie, and be a dishonorable piece of filth. Do not trust a word he says, Brynden said. You will be surrounded by good advisors, especially Lord Hawker and Lord Umber, when you finally face the man. But there is one thing I tell all to come to me, for advice. Trust your instincts. What makes Robb a great strategist is that he knows when to trust his gut. You must keep that in mind when you're fighting a man who no longer has morals. Do you understand? Jon nodded again. I think so, he answered. Brynden nodded as well. Good. You have excellent warrior instincts. Those will put you in good stead, just remember that. With that, the knight began to walk away, the but stopped and turned when Jon called his name. "Dear Brynden." "Yes? Why? Why? What? Why have you been so nice to me?" Jon asked. "You barely know me."
The old knight shrugged.
"You know Cat sent me letters telling me about you, about her fears of what you might become." Jon nodded. "Cat is a smart woman, but she was wrong in your case." Sarah Brynden continued. "I've seen a lot of life, lad. I've served in 3 wars, now a 4th. I've seen people, old and young, show more courage than most nobles. I've seen highborn and lowborn fight and drink together. What I'm saying is, life is not black and white, it's gray. I promised myself long ago to never judge a man by what is said about him, until I see and talk with him personally. I wasn't sure what to make of you. Now I do." And with that, the Blackfish walked away, leaving behind a stunned and silent Jon. Tywin III. "The Starks have retreated to High Heart," Sarah Harris Swift reported. The old, yellow-clad knight looked worn and dirty. He had spent the last 2 days on the road harassing the Starks during their retreat from Harrenhal. "They've made camp around the hill." "Fools," Ceratitos hissed. "It is curious why the Stark boy hasn't retreated back to Reborn." Sarah Kevin mused. "How many men have they lost?" "Some 25,000, Lord Wrecker answered. 10,000 more than our own. That still leaves the boy with over 15,000. Lord Banefort said, adding his voice to the conversation now. "Reborn is probably the smallest of the great castles of Westeros." "You are correct, Banefort," Tywin said, speaking for the first time. "But do not think that the boy will be alone." "My lord?" Lord Marbrand asked, confused. "Robb Stark still has many allies, my lord." Prince Oberyn drawled. "He has probably called for aid already." "Most likely the Blackfish or his bastard brother," Tywin said. Adding to the Dornishman's point, both have hosts that number over 10,000.
"So what do we do?"
Sarah Harris asked. "We march in the morning," Tywin said crisply. "We will attack the Stark boy and finish him off before he has a chance to lick his wounds. We will break his army on the hill of High Heart and send his men fleeing into the western hills. Robb Stark will not be among them. If he is not captured, then I want him killed." "What of his other armies?" Lord Riker asked. "Once the Tyros and Stormlords are brought to heel, then we shall march on the remaining rivermen and defeat them as well." Tywin answered. "And the Northmen? Roose Bolton can deal with them," Oberyn said, waving aside the man's gesture. "Once they see that there is no longer a point being in the south, they will return to their frozen wasteland." "You are correct, Prince Oberyn," Tywin said. "We will help the Boltons as necessary to make sure they retake control of the region. Other than that, I will not march a host into the north to simply deal with skirmishes." "Wise words, Lord Lannister," Prince Oberyn praised as he leaned back in his seat, sipping on what seemed to be an ever-present goblet of wine in his hand. Tywin pretended not to notice the compliment. "That will be all," he ordered. "Prepare the men. We leave at first light." The lords nodded and left the room, leaving Tywin and 2 others behind. Kevin glanced at the man known as the Red Viper, curious as to why the man has stayed. The younger Lannister usually stayed behind to discuss the battle with his brother. "Is all well, Prince Oberyn?" Kevin asked curiously. The Dornishman gave the old knight a languid smile. "I would hope so," he said. "If you have stayed behind, then it is to discuss something with your brother. Something that could very well include my men and I." Kevin opened his mouth to respond, then quickly closed it. The prince had a point. Whatever Kevin and Tywin would talk about, the Dornish cavalry would most certainly play a part. "You performed well during the battle, Prince Oberyn," Tywin said, still speaking in his flat, emotionless voice. Oberyn gave a mock bow, which he somehow managed to look graceful even while seated. "I am happy to be of service, my lord." Once again Westeros is reminded of Dornish steel. "Indeed. The battle was becoming rather frustrating until you and your men arrived," Kevin said. "The Stark's front was close to breaking our center." "So I heard," Oberyn responded. "It seems the Stormlands breeds great warriors." Kevin nodded. "Aye, but your riders made quick work of them. I saw you led the charge yourself." The Dornish prince had done just that. Garbed in leather and bronze armor and golden silk, the man wielded a strange spear tipped with a short blade and a shield that shined like the sun. He was a fearsome sight, and looked elegant and extremely deadly when he fought. Oberyn shrugged. "What better way to prove loyalty to our new allies?" he explained. "I hear that your flank was close to breaking before I arrived." Kevin grimaced. "The Tyrell Knights fought well," he said. "The Stark boy hammered my flank from the east as well. I was able to bring my host in and put our enemies to our front just before you arrived." "So the boy was trying to turn your flank," Oberyn mused. How ironic that it was his men that were driven towards the God's Eye.
"Is there something you both need?"
Tywin snapped finally. Kevin cleared his throat, surprised with how easily he had been pulled into a conversation with the Dornish prince. "Sorry, my lord. I thought you should know how many nobles die in battle. Any that I should care about?" Tywin asked, still annoyed. "Sarah Lyle Craighall and Sir Reynold Westerling were lost in the battle. Sarah Lyle died fighting Garland Tyrell, and the Westerling boy died from the cavalry charge to my flank," Kevin explained. "How terrible," Tywin grunted. "Have their bones sent back to their homes when the war is over?" Kevin nodded. "It will be done." "Is there something you need, Prince Oberyn?" Tywin asked. Oberyn shook his head. "No, my lord," he said, standing up. "Though if I may broach a question, has the Stark boy surprised you?" Tywin raised an eyebrow. "Speak plainly," he said, his voice dangerously low. Prince Oberyn placed his hands behind his back, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Well, my lord, Robb Stark has certainly surprised me," he explained. "He's a boy as green as grass and is doing very well for himself. He's surrounded by good advisors. Do not give the boy too much credit." Tywin scoffed. "He did not have them when he gained the Reach and Stormlands as his allies." Oberyn countered. "The boy has been absurdly lucky that it's getting hard to pass off his achievements as mere good fortune." "Well, his good luck seems to have abandoned him," Tywin snapped. "He lost the battle and will soon lose his life." Oberyn, sensing that he had pushed the old lion to the brink, simply bowed and left, leaving the two brothers alone. "Oberyn." "My prince," the rider said, bowing as the prince emerged from the shadows. The two were meeting in Oberyn's personal quarters in the heart of the Dornish encampment. There would be no prying eyes there. "You have word from my brother?" Oberyn asked, looking up from his reading. The man shook his head. "From Lord Jurenwood on Dragonstone," the man replied, handing the scroll to the prince. "And your nephew." Oberyn raised an eyebrow and opened the scroll, quickly reading it. A sly smile spread across the man's handsome face as he threw the message into the fire. "You have done well, my friend. Go, find yourself a woman, a drink." The man hesitated before looking behind him. "I did not come alone," he said. Oberyn's smile disappeared in an instant, his hand moving slowly towards the dagger he had on his desk. "You were followed?" he asked. The man shook his head, moving to the side as another person entered the tent. He wore a red-hooded cloak, but it failed to fully cover the golden armor he wore or the blue hair that tumbled out of the hood. "Hello, uncle," the man said, throwing back his hood. He was a tall, strapping young man, with elegant facial features that seemed a little off due to his blue hair, which hung loosely down his back and shoulders. His armor was bright gold, with one arm adorned with multiple golden bands, each band marked with a skull over crossed spears, the mark of the Golden Company. "Aegon," Oberyn breathed. Standing up, "You are supposed to be on Dragonstone preparing the attack." "Lord Connington can deal with that," he said, dismissively. "I came to hear your report." "The battle went in favor of the Lannisters, just as we planned," Oberyn said. "The Stark boy has retreated to a hill called Highheart, and has dug in there. And Tywin will go after him," Aegon continued. Oberyn nodded. "He will." "Good," Aegon said, smiling fiercely. "There is word that the Vale is rising up. Lysanos' spies say that Lord Royce is leading them." "Then they will surely march to Stark's aid," Oberyn said. "This does not bode well for us." "Perhaps it might," Aegon said. "When Tywin marches on the Starks, keep an eye to the east. When the Vale forces are close, leave and return to us at King's Landing." Oberyn nodded, realizing what would happen if the Vale joined the fight. "I will see it done," he promised. Aegon grinned, clasping arms with his uncle. "Next time we meet, I will be on my rightful throne. You know that if the Vale joins the fight, that puts 5 kingdoms against us," Oberyn pointed out. Aegon snorted. "They will see our power and kneel before his rightful king," he answered, his voice filled with a young man's passion. Oberyn didn't feel the same, but couldn't bring himself to correct his nephew. Something he and his brother Doran had worried about was the boy being raised by Jon Connington. Would he be told about his grandfather? It seems like he wasn't. I will see you in a few weeks, nephew, Oberyn said finally, when you are seated on the throne. Asha. Nuncle, Asha called, walking up to the steel-clad warrior and his group of captains. The uncle and niece were meeting on the docks at Torrens Square. The rest of Asha's men were still at Deepwood Modern under the command of her other uncle, Roderick Harlaw. Victarion had sent her a raven, telling her to meet him at the other northern castle under Ironborn command. Asha, Victarion said, nodding to the gangly girl. You made good time. The drowned god was helpful, Asha said. Why did you call me here? The Septon's been captured, Victarion said bluntly. The fool took Winterfell and then lost it. Asha's eyes widened. Is he dead? No, Victarion said, shaking his head. He's been captured by the Boltons. According to the Danfair, Cleftjaw was with the boy too. Were they captured? They were burned, Victarion answered. Winterfell has been burnt to a crisp. My men found their bodies in the Godswood. Asha cursed her brother and his foolishness. She knew that he felt slighted by their father, but she didn't think he'd go as far as to take Winterfell. The Ironborn don't do well away from the water. Even Theon should have known that. Tell me what happened, Asha said finally. Everything. The boy Cleftjaw and the Danfair raided Bear Island before they hit a village on the stony shore. Victarion explained, his face emotionless and cold. Theon and the Cleftjaw went after Winterfell and took the damn thing, capturing Lady Stark and her family. The Boltons and other northern houses besieged the castle. My men found signs of an encampment around the castle. I then received a rider from the man who captured Theon and Lady Stark. Victarion turned around and was handed a small wooden box, which he then gave to Asha. I was then sent that with the threat that more pieces would come if the Ironborn remained in the north. Asha opened the box and felt bile ride up in her throat. It was a pinky finger that had a gold ring on it. On the ring was a crude carving of a squid. So the Boltons have my brother and Lady Stark, Asha said finally. The Cleftjaw and his men were burned alive. She sighed. We need to rescue my brother. No, Victarion said firmly. We are leaving the north. Asha's head snapped up. What? There is more going on than you know, girl, Victarion grumbled. The Boltons have turned their cloaks. The northern army is returning home. Eagle's Roost has been besieged, and Bodin Hawker has returned to his nest. More men are returning to the north than we need, and they will strike at us as well as the Boltons. We cannot leave my brother behind. Asha cried. He made his choice, and we will not be beholden to the boy. Victarion growled. The Iron Fleet will leave the north and head south to the Reach. Balon has sent word that the Red Wine Fleet is attacking the Westerlands. Asha shook her head angrily. I will stay, she said stubbornly. I will not leave my brother to be flayed. Victarion crossed his arms. Famine is on the other side of the fucking north. You will obey me, girl. I am Lord Captain. The two family members glared at each other, neither giving in to each other. Asha rested her hands on the axes at her side. I lost Theon once. I will not lose him again. Take the rest of my men, but leave me 2 crews.
The Transcown scowled but nodded.
Fine. I will leave you with the first wind and the sea song. You have 2 months to save Theon. If you don't or can't, I expect you in the Reach. Asha bowed slightly. Yes, Knuckle. Get back to Deepwood, Victarion ordered, glancing north. There's no telling how long the Seahawk will remain docked. What happened in the north? Asha asked curiously. The Boltons and others turned their cloaks on the Starks, one of Victarion's captains explained. Resswells and Dustins among them. The northern host is close to Moat Cailin. Another added. Asha raised an eyebrow. How do you know all this? Not all my ships have been raiding. Victarion rumbled. They have been my eyes and ears along the western coast of the north. I was not going to be surprised by Hawker, nor anyone else. Is Stark with them? Asha asked. Victarion shook his head. That is not known. But we do not have the men to repel the northern army. Not with where we are now. We will return to the Iron Islands, replenish what we need, leave our booty, and head south. Does my father know of this? Asha asked. He will understand, Victarion answered. The Danfair has already set his sails for Pike. Asha was surprised but did not pursue the subject. Her uncle was a mighty warrior, and as good a commander on the seas as any, but he was not a thinker, or at least not known as one. He followed Asha's father, and the Damfair like a pet bear, the muscle to their brains. It seems that he was determined to not make the same mistakes that had happened in the failed rebellion years ago. I will return to Deepwood and send my men back to Pike, Asha promised. I wish you good fortune in the Reach. I advise you again, girl, do not waste your time with Theon. He chose to go away from the drowned god's strength. Victarion said. Asha shook her head. I will not lose him again, not while he's still alive. The big man shrugged. Fine. And with that, Victarion turned and left, his captains following him back to the castle. Asha sighed and returned to her own ship, taking her place by the tiller as her crew disembarked and started their journey back down the river and back to Deepwood Mode. Line break. I agree with Victarion, Asha, Roderick Harlaw said, pouring ale for himself and his niece. You know what the Boltons do to their prisoners? I thought flaying was outlawed in the north, Asha argued. Roose Bolton turned his back on the Starks. He can do as he pleases. The man known as the Reader countered. You told me yourself that the sick fuckers sent Victarion a finger. What would you have us do? Trek across the frozen tundra, breaking into a castle, and then go back across the fucking north with a half-dead body? Asha couldn't believe that she was hearing. She and her mother's brother had always had a good relationship. He was the most reasonable of her uncles, and she normally went to him when she needed sound advice. The only downside to the man was that he was too damned cautious. He's my brother, I cannot lose him again, Asha cried, throwing her tankard against the wall. I have to try. You can't attack the castle, Roderick scoffed. We have less than 500 men. The rest of our force has sailed for Pike. All I need are a dozen, Asha growled. Roderick crossed his arms, looking at his niece. There are 20 horses in the stable. You can take 20 men. The older man drained his ale and slammed the tankard back on the table. Do not kill yourself, trying to save your brother. Asha went to speak, but Roderick held up a hand to stop her. You are your father's heir, he said, his voice slow and deliberate. If you die, then Victarion or the Damfair will become ruler of the Iron Islands. That cannot happen. You are smarter than both. You need to live. Do you understand me? Asha, surprised by her uncle's words, nodded slowly. She knew her father had groomed her to be his heir. She just never thought about what might happen if she died. I understand, Roderick nodded. Good. Now get your men and get what supplies you need. You have a long ride ahead of you, and you best keep a fucking good eye out.
There's no one between here and the Dreadfort, Asha pointed out.
There's the mountain clans. I believe they are very loyal to the Starks. Once you reach Bolton Lands, it will be crawling with the bastards. The man's forces are there, and Eagle's Roost. Asha nodded, seeing the sense in her uncle's words. Thank you, uncle. Come back alive, Asha, the reader responded. For the Iron Island's sake. Robb 19. The Northern King looked out over his camp, feeling the weight of the thousands of deaths on his shoulders. The battle had been all but won. The Lannister center was almost broken. His flanks were holding. His archers were killing men by the dozens. It was all going perfectly. Tywin's center would have been broken, and the Lannisters would have retreated. Then the fucking Dornish showed up. Thousands of riders bearing the pierced son of House Martell cutting down Robb's men like an unstoppable wave. All Robb could do was watch, knowing that he couldn't do anything to save his men but flee the field. The death toll was burned into his brain. 25,000 men, half of his Stormlander force, and 3/4 of the Reachmen under Garland. More than half of his total force had been wiped away like snow in the sun. All he had left now was roughly 16,000 men. There were also the deaths of his friends. Loras had been injured, nearly killed in the Dornish charge. He had been saved when Garland had hauled him out of his saddle when the withdrawal had been issued. Then there was Perwyn, whose body had been brought back by Lord Caron's cavalry. He had died helping hold back the mountain's raiders, as the Dornish closed in. Your Grace, Garland asked, walking up to Robb. Is all well? Robb wanted to laugh. Fine, Garland, he answered curtly. Thankfully, Garland had made it out of the battle relatively unscathed. He had a few bruises and cuts, but still looked like he could swing his swords without too much trouble. Robb had let out a huge sigh of relief when he had seen him after the battle. He wasn't sure how he would face Margaery again if both of her brothers had been injured. Garland took Robb's clipped tone without complaint. "Your council is ready for you." Robb nodded and walked towards the command tent that had been set up on the top of the hill. High Heart was a natural defensive position, the slope of the leading into the flat ground that made it so that no enemy force could approach unseen. Robb's army was camped on the west side of the hill, ironically facing the Westerlands where Robb's allies were. The command tent along with the tents of Robb's commanders had been set up within the circle of weirwood stumps. When Robb walked into the tent, all his commanders looked at him. They were like Garland, bruised and scraped, but still alive.
"My lords," Robb said,
trying not to let his sadness and frustration show. "Do we know what Tywin lost?" "We are still unsure, your grace," Lord Caron answered. "Most of his infantry should be gone, but now that he had Dornish allies, the losses seem little now." Robb nodded. "Unfortunately, do we know how in the blazes the man managed to convince the Dornish to fight for him?" For a moment no one spoke, just looking at each other. It was clear to Robb that his commanders hadn't come to a clear conclusion of how the Lancedars and Martells had joined forces. "Garland?" Robb asked. The Tyrell Knight shook his head. "We have no idea, your grace," he answered honestly. "The idea seems so far-fetched." "Obviously not to Tywin." Robb snapped, taking a breath to calm himself. He continued in a more peaceful tone. "Joffrey is a sadistic cunt. That has to be a clear fact by now. But there is still Tommen and Myrcella." Harrenhal nodded. "Prince Doran has 2 sons. Perhaps the girl was offered to one of them." Robb scowled. "So it would seem." Sarah Donnell shifted in his seat. "Sarah, we going to retreat to Riverrun?" Robb shook his head. "No," he said flatly. Lord Caron looked around the room. Besides Lord Forrester, he was the oldest and most experienced commander in the room. "Your Grace," he said, "we have other men in the field. If we call on Lord Tarley and Ser Brynden, we can still beat—" "No," Robb said again. "We will not run from Tywin. Not again. A rider has already been sent to Ser Brynden, and he has roughly 10,000 men with him." "Will that be enough?" Lucas Blackwood asked. "It'll have to be," Robb answered grimly. "My lords, we cannot run from Tywin. We cannot allow him to gain the upper hand on us." "What are your orders?" Garland asked, crossing his arms. He looked like the only man willing to go along with whatever Robb was about to say. "We dig in here," Robb said. "Have the archers make platforms on the hill. We'll have the men dig trenches and prepare stakes. If Tywin wants to take us down, we'll give him one damn good fight." "Line break?" "Your Grace," Galen asked, staying behind as the other commanders left. "Garland." "The battle wasn't your fault," Garland said, leaning forward in his seat. "We didn't know that they would have allies." Robb shook his head, gazing down at the scarred and rough tabletop. "Garland, who is commanding this army?" "Robb." "Who, Garland?" Robb asked again, cutting off his good brother. "It wasn't your fault." "It's all my fault," Robb snapped. 25,000 fucking men are dead, because of me. How were any of us to know that the Lannisters and Martells had allied?" Garland argued. "You can't blame yourself for that." "Then who's to blame?" Robb asked, glaring at the Reachman. "Tell me, Garland." "Who?" "No one, Robb," Garland said easily. "It was just bad luck." Robb shook his head, straightening up. "I cannot take the glory of a victory, and then not take the blame for a defeat. That's how any of this works, and you know it." Garland sighed and leaned back in his chair, gazing at the young monarch. "Robb, you saved thousands of lives by ordering a retreat. A lot of men are alive because of you. And 25,000 are dead because I didn't know my opponent." Robb shot back. "If you let their deaths get to you, you'll lose even more men." Garland said, his tone a lot harsher. "People die in war, mistakes are made, we will not win every battle. You need to understand that and move forward." Robb glared at the knight, who held his king's gaze unflinchingly. The two men glared at each other for a few moments before Robb grabbed his crown and threw it at the table. "Fine," he said. "Fine." Garland nodded firmly. "Good." The two men sat in silence as the tension left the tent. Robb poured himself a glass of wine, downing it in one gulp as Garland retrieved the bronze and iron crown, placing it in front of Robb's seat. There was a slight dent in the bronze circlet from where it hit the table. "I'll get this fixed," he said, walking out of the tent. "Garland, how's Loras?" Robb asked before the man was gone. Garland grimaced. He took a beating, but he should live, he answered. Riverrun is a much better place for him to recover than here. When Robb's force had reunited at High Heart, he had sent the worst of the wounded and the dead nobles back to Riverrun. The field maesters that traveled with Robb's army were currently working their way through the men at the bottom of the hill. Hopefully we will see him again, Robb said. Garland nodded. I plan to, your grace. Line break? Robb found himself once again standing on the edge of the hill, overlooking his army. Grey Wind laid next to him, tired after a full day of hunting in the woods around the hill. Robb's talk with Garland earlier had been helpful, but the young monarch couldn't help but feel the deaths of his men on his shoulders. It was simply how he was raised. Every decision was going to be put on his shoulders, just as it had with his father when he was Lord of Winterfell. Your Grace? Someone asked. Robb turned to find Daisy and Smalljan behind him. The two northerners always seemed to be next to each other, but that was more likely due to the fact that they were the only northerners who remained in Robb's battle guard. The rest went north to reclaim their homes with Jon. Smalljan, Robb said, greeting them. Daisy, you look like shit. Smalljan commented, taking a swig of a wineskin. He held it out to Robb. Here. Robb shrugged and took a drink before handing it back to the other man. Robb usually had watered wine, but the wineskin held unwatered wine, and it left a burning, sour taste in Robb's mouth. Is all well? Daisy asked. Robb gave them a grim smile. You are not the first person to ask me that today, he said. I'm fine. You're a terrible liar, Daisy said, crossing her arms. It's the battle, isn't it? Robb raised an eyebrow. Am I that easy to read? You haven't developed your father's stone face yet. Smalljan joked. A few more years and battles might get you there. Robb allowed a small smile to show on his face. It wasn't much, but it was the closest thing to a smile he's had on his face since the night before the battle, when he and other members of his guard had sat around a fire and drank. I hear we're not moving on to Riverrun. Daisy said. Robb nodded. We can't run. Good, Smalljan replied. I would have smacked you if you had ordered us to retreat to Riverrun. You'd smack your king? Robb asked. If I had to, the big man replied easily. Robb chuckled. And I'd probably deserve it too. The three stood in silence for a moment, feeling no need to talk or make conversation, simply being in each other's company. It was the kind of silence that developed naturally. Do you think this will be our final fight? Daisy asked quietly. Robb was about to shake his head, then stopped. He looked the heiress of Bear Island in her eye, not hiding what his true feelings were. I'm not sure, Robb admitted. If it is, I'm going down swinging. You have your will set? Smalljan asked in the same quiet tone they were all speaking in. Robb nodded. Margaery will become queen, and Jon shall be my heir, until the babe is born, he answered. I sent a rider to Riverrun with the wounded and dead with a message for Margaery. It legitimizes Jon. Will Margaery accept that? Daisy asked. Robb nodded again. Both Margaery and Jon will accept my wishes, I have no doubt. I should have legitimized Jon earlier. I've always wanted him to be a Stark. I wanted to see his face when he learned about it. Why didn't you make him one earlier? Smalljan asked. Robb shrugged. The timing never seemed right. I had every belief that we would win, and he would be by my side, when we took King's Landing and avenged our father. Better late than never. Daisy grunted. You best get your sleep, your grace. We have a lion to prepare for. Jonata Phaeton. Moat Cailin had once been a mighty stronghold with 20 towers, great walls of basalt, and a wood keep. It was said to have rivaled Winterfell in terms of strength and prestige, but like years tend to do, the fortress has been eroded to what it was now, a few towers held together by half-sunken curtain walls that showed evidence of the former power and majesty of the moat. The wooden keep had long ago rotten away, along with most of the towers. There were 3 towers left, and they had total dominion over the causeway that was the single road in and out of the north. The strongest and largest was the Gatehouse Tower. It was squat and wide, holding up some of the walls with the last of its fading strength. Then there was the Children's Tower, tall and slender, with half of the crenellations missing on its crown. There was a rumor that in the highest room was where the children of the forest brought the hammers of the seas down on the neck. The final tower was the Drunkard's Tower, aptly named because of how the structure leaned. It stood in the ruins of the south and western walls. Even though Moat Cailin was a ruin in every sense of the word, it was still a highly defensible ruin. The 3 towers covered the causeway, the only way through the moat. If the attacking army wants to try and attack one tower, then they must cross chest-deep water infested with lizard lions, along with the constant hail of arrow fire from the other 2 towers. Moat Cailin was the definition of the phrase damned if you do, damned if you don't. Jon the Great boomed. You were missed this morning. The Great Jon was accompanied by a few other commanders and close friends of Jon's father, Rickard Karstark, Maeggy Mormont, and Galbart Glover. They were good people, honest and straightforward. There was no hidden agenda with them. My lords, my lady, Jon greeted, nodding to them. You look pale, the old she-bear barked jokingly. That moat does that to boys. Jon smiled slightly, just thinking about how to attack it. Head on is our only option, Karstark grunted. Everything else will get us killed. More killed, Glover corrected. How many men does Frey have in there? Jon asked, glancing at the Greyton. Black Walder has 2,000 buggers holed up in there with him, the massive man spat. The rest must be with the leech. What did Lord Hawker have to say about the fortress? Jon asked. He said to build a lot of rams, Karstark answered. A lot of them. Jon grimaced and looked back at the fortress. From where he was standing, it looked like a stone giant huddled over the road, cutting off all access to the north. Crawling through the giant's limbs and veins were leather-capped soldiers, bearing spears, bows, and the bridge of House Frey. The bastard of Winterfell remembered meeting the man known as Black Walder during his time idle in Riverrun. He was a wiry, temperamental man who inspired fear in all of the serving staff. He had been chewed out by Septa Stavron once for being caught forcing himself on a serving girl. He was a stubborn man who had little regard for the men under his command. If he was going to lose Moat Cailin to the Northern Army, then he was going to take as many of Jon's 13,000 as he could. They looked too damned arrogant. The Greyton rumbled angrily. We need some of those stone chuckers Robert had at Pike. Trebuchets. Glover helped. Aye. Trebuchets, the Greyton said. See how comfortable those fuckers are when they got boulders flying over their heads. They're not at all comfortable. A quiet, calm voice said from out of nowhere. The group turned to find a small, green-cloaked man leaning on a frog spear. After nearly a year, the Lord of Greywater Watch hadn't changed to Jon. Howland, the Greatson boomed. When the fuck did you show up? The Cranogman jerked a thumb behind him at the stable hand that was taking away his small barrel-chested horse. Just now, he answered flatly. You said they weren't comfortable, Jon said, interrupting before anyone else said anything. How do you know? I poisoned their water, he answered simply. You always were a smart one, Maeggy said, she and the others chuckling darkly. Why don't they get water from the moat? Jon asked, glancing over his shoulder at the fortress. Tried, Howland answered. One idiot lost a hand to a lizard lion, and another fought a dart in the jugular. The wiry lord frowned slightly. I was aiming for the vein next to it. You're slipping, Karstark grunted, crossing his arms. Howland shook his head. Fucker slipped.
How did you poison the water?
Jon, bring the conversation back on track. Howland looked a little amused. My family has ruled the Neck since the Age of Heroes. We know every inch of the moats like we know the swamps. It was child's play. They've been without water for 3 days. They won't last another 2. How do you know? Jon asked. Howland looked at Jon, his hood falling back slightly so that his moss-green eyes could be seen. There was a harsh light there that made Jon just a little uneasy. Again, he was reminded why Howland Reed was such a dangerous man. Not only was he armed to the teeth in weapons that he had been using for decades, but he was also cunning and had no qualms about dishonorably killing men. The Freys aren't the first to try and hold the moat, Howland responded. I know how long it takes before men begin to die of thirst. Again, the older nobles chuckled at the man's deadpan delivery. The Greyton patted Howland on the shoulder, his ham-sized hand almost the same size as Lord Reed's head. Why haven't they abandoned the moat? Jon asked. It's the only thing protecting them, Lord Hawker said, walking up to the group, flanked by his 3 sons. He nodded to Lord Reed. Your scouts were helpful. Most of the men on the walls are dummies. Dummies? Glover asked. Straw-filled decoys, Hawker explained. Very few actual men walk the walls. The marshman described them as pale and gaunt. I've seen the effects before. Thirst. Now is the perfect time to attack, the Greyjoy declared. Jon shook his head. Not just yet. My lord, Lord Reed said they won't last another 2 days. We simply wait 2 days and attack them when they're at their worst. I'll prepare the rams, Hawker said. We'll need handheld ones as well. There are places in the towers where a dozen or so men could hold off an army. We'll need to batter them down. Howland added. Jon nodded. We attack in 2 days. Lord Hawker, you have command of the van. Lord Stark, Lady Maid, you have the front. Lord Glover, the archers. Am I pig shit? The Greyjoy asked angrily. Jon shook his head. I might have a special task for you, Lord Umber. He turned to Howland. Is there any way we can get a small group of warriors into the moat and take the enemy by surprise? Howland nodded. I'll have my men open it for you. How many men do you need? Jon glanced at the Greyjoy. Myself, Lord Umber, and Robb's battle guard should be sufficient. 9 men in all. I'll take you over the night before Lord Hawker begins his attack. Howland promised. Just make sure the Walking Mountain keeps his great mouth shut. You have your roles, my lords. I suggest we get to them. In 2 days, we'll have the moat in and we start freeing our home from traitors and rebels. Line break. You did well out there, Howland said, walking into the tent behind Jon and Ghost. Reminded me of your father. Which one? Jon grumbled, pouring 2 tankards of ale and handing one to the small lord. Eddard, Howland answered easily. Your chosen father. He glanced down at Frost. How is Blackfire treating you? Frost now, Jon corrected. I honestly thought that not many would notice. It's Valyrian bloody steel. Howland chuckled, dropping into an open seat. It's not exactly common. Would you not point it out if you saw pigs flying? Jon chuckled as well, and took a seat, leaning forward, cradling the tankard in his hands. Your children were at Winterfell last we spoke. Where are they now? Howland shook his head, his face becoming an unreadable mask. I don't know, he answered quietly. Jody and Amira have passed beyond my vision. Your vision? Jon asked. Howland shook his head again. Nothing, lad. I don't know where they are, but I know they are not dead. Jon sat up a little. Really? I had friends search the ruins. They found markings in the crypts. There were also charred bodies outside the Godswood. Given the size and number, I suspect it was the Ironborn raiders Greyjoy had with him. So Bran and Rickon are alive? Jon asked, not wanting to believe it in case it wasn't true. My friends found prints heading north, Howland said. 2 were wolf prints, that much was certain. North, Jon wondered. Do you think they would be heading for the last hearth or Carhold? Hopefully not Carahold, Howland said, taking a drink of his ale. Arnulf Stark has been spotted amongst Bolton's men. Arnulf? Who's he? Jon asked. Rickard's Castellan, Howland answered. A grouchy, crooked man. I wouldn't be surprised if he was somehow pressured into joining the Boltons. Does Lord Stark know? Jon asked. Howland shrugged. I'll let him know tonight or tomorrow. It's no real problem for us. As soon as Rickard is back in the north, he'll bring his uncle and cousins to heal. So Bran and Rickon went north, along with your children, but we don't know where, Jon said. Perhaps we could send a raven to Last Hearth. Howland nodded hesitantly. Perhaps. One of my friends followed the trail and found that it split at the last river, just a little south of the Umber's borders. One trail went northeast, while the other continued north along the King's Road. Both had direwolf tracks. My brothers split up? Jon asked, leaning forward even more now, his face covered with worry. Why in the blazes would they do that? Howland shook his head. I know not. My friend tried to follow one track, the one that headed northeast, but lost it. When he retraced his steps to the last river, the tracks heading north had been covered with snow. Jon sighed, leaning back in his chair, gripping his tankard so hard that he thought he might crack the wood. His brothers had split up. Why? That was the biggest question on his mind. Why had they split up? Why wouldn't they simply head to the last hearth? Or why not Castle Black? Bran was too smart for this. Your friends, can they find Rickon or Bran? Jon asked finally. Howland shrugged. They can try. They have their limitations. You should know. If they go to any of the 3 Night's Watch castles still in use, then I should know. But if they don't go to any castle, then don't expect me to work magic when I can't. Jon nodded. Fair enough. Howland stood up, drained the last of his ale, and put a hand on Jon's shoulder. Do not worry, for your siblings. They have more help than you may realize. I will continue to search for them. You focus on bringing the fight to the Boltons and Ironborn. Jon nodded, standing up and grasping arms with the older man. Thank you, my lord. Howland gave Jon a small smile. Your father would be proud of you, lad. Jon returned the smile. Which one? He joked. Both? Howland said before ducking out of the tent. Catelyn III. The door to her room opened, the torchlight illuminating more of the gloom and barrenness that surrounded the Lady of Winterfell. Her bed was little more than a simple cot, with a straw mattress that had no more thickness than a gold dragon, with a stiff pillow and a scratchy blanket that not even a city beggar would use. She had a simple table and chair off in the corner of her ridiculously tiny room, both of which were nailed to the floor. Even though the only window was a small slit set high on the wall, her captors seemed to think that Catelyn would be able to escape using either as a way out, or a way to beat her captors senseless. Kristen sat up in her bed, garbed in a simple gray dress, her auburn hair dirty and loose around her shoulders and back. She had been the Boltons' prisoner for a few weeks now, but she still had a spark in her eye. She would not break for these men. She was Catelyn Tully, wife to Eddard Stark, daughter to Hoster Tully. The Blackfish was her uncle, and the young wolf was her son. These men could kill her, but they would not break her. My lady, Rose's whisper tone greeted as he walked into the room, one hand holding a three-legged stool and another one the dagger at his side. The treasonous lord of the Dreadfort was dressed for war in leather and chainmail, his stupid pink cloak still clinging to his shoulders. Catelyn wanted to smack the calm look from his face. What do you want? Catelyn snapped, sitting on the edge of her bed, her posture perfect, her back as straight as a sword edge, and her head held high. I trust the accommodations are to your liking, Rose continued, ignoring Catelyn's biting tone as he sat on the stool, leaning against the opposite wall. It's a cell, Catelyn scoffed. Do not give me sludge and call it wine, you pig. Rose rolled his eyes. I'm trying to be civil. What do you want, Rose? The Lord of the Dreadfort wagged his finger. Come now, my lady. There are niceties that must be acknowledged here. I am the lord of this castle. You will address me as Lord Bolton, or my lord. You are a traitor, and naught but a piece of filth. Catelyn snarled. You will receive nothing but hatred and scorn from me. So be it, Rose sighed. If you do not show me the respect I deserve, I will have you stripped to nothing but your underclothes, and thrown in an actual cell, with the poachers, rapists, murderers, and thieves that I have yet to ship off to the wall. Now tell me, would you rather be with them where my guards won't be able to protect you, or are we going to have a conversation here? Catelyn put all the hatred she could into her glare, but still managed to nod slightly. Fine, my lord, she gritted out. That's better, Rose said with a slight smirk. Now let's catch you up with what's happened. Let's start with your son, the young and foolish wolf boy. He fought Tywin on the banks of the God's Eye, and was sent away with his tail between his legs, and most of his force dead, thanks to the Dornish cavalry. Catelyn frowned when she heard that last part. She knew that the Martys had hated both the Lancers and Robert Baratheon for the part they played in the death of Elia Martell and her children at the hands of the Mountain. It makes no sense as to why they would be allies now. The only reason that would make sense would be that Joffrey was now arranged to marry Prince Doran's eldest daughter, meaning that Sansa would not have to marry the little monster. The Lady of Winterfell got a small amount of pleasure believing that Sansa wouldn't have to deal with the blonde boy king. Is Robb dead? Catelyn asked quietly. Rose shook his head. Unfortunately not. He and his army have retreated to Highheart, where they are waiting for Tywin to arrive and finish them off. Now, how about your uncle and Ned's bastard? The combined might of the North and Riverlands have recently taken the twins, but the Northern Lords are marching north alone under the command of the bastard Jon Snow. The Leech Lord leaned forward. How does that make you feel, my lady? Your son sent the bastard to save you. Oh, how Robb Stark loves his family. Catelyn did not give in to the goading, merely shaking her head. Perhaps he does not see you as a threat, she replied crisply. Roose shrugged again and leaned back against the wall. Be that as it may, Robb will soon be dead, and since your other sons are as well, the Northern Lords will abandon the bastard. You seem certain that Lords Umber Karstark and Glover will follow you. Catelyn said curiously. Dangerous arrogance for a man who has no true heir himself. Roose smirked. Joffrey legitimized Ramsay. I received the declaration myself a few days ago. Catelyn smiled slightly as well, but it never reached her eyes. The Northern Lords do not owe loyalty to the king in the Iron Throne, but the king in the North. They will never acknowledge your claim. It means nothing to them, and as much as I hate Jon, he is still the son of my husband, and you are a fool if you believe that the lords with Jon will put aside their love for my husband to follow you. Roose's smile faded slightly. Agree to disagree, he replied tersely. But the Dornish have marched to Tywin's aid, and the Vale is now doing the same. The blood drained from Catelyn's face, and from the smirk that now reappeared on Roose's face, it showed. That's right. Your dear sister is helping the Lannister destroy your son and his little rebellion. So much for family, duty, honor. Roose gloated. Catelyn shook her head, not believing what she was hearing. Lysa had declared the Vale neutral. The lords of the Vale would never fight against Robb, never against the son of Eddard Stark. It was impossible. Or it should have been. What are you going to do with me? Catelyn asked quietly, doing everything she could to keep her composure. When the Northern Lords see that their cause is lost, they will be welcomed under my banner, Roose explained, standing up and grabbing his stool. Your son will be executed as a traitor. The River Lords will be ruled by whatever Frey makes it out of this war alive, and the Reach and Stormlands will heal and return to the fold of Joffrey's rule. As for you, you shall become my wife after the war is over, and give me a proper heir. With that said, the Lord of the Dreadfort strode out of the room, leaving a pale and shaking Catelyn behind him. Line break. You're a bloody cunt, Arnulf. Mors snarled, leaning forward and glaring at the crooked man sitting across from the two Castellans of Last Hearth. Known each other for years. Fought with Ned and Roberts in the Greyjoy rebellions, and now you show up on our doorstep with an army at your back. The uncle of the Lord of Harrenhal glared back at the two massive men, one gnarled hand gripping the pommel of his blackthorn cane. The armor he wore seemed to hang off of his bent shoulders. The belt at his waist was pulled to its last notch. He was a pitiful warrior to behold, but he had his second son Arthur behind him. The lad was young and well-built, with the same gray eyes and gaunt face. His hand never left the pommel of the broadsword at his side. This does not have to end in bloodshed. Arnulf spat back. Surrender to my men, pledge your loyalty to Bolton, and let us be done with this business. Like hell we will, Mor's brother Hother growled. The Greatson is still alive, and until he says otherwise, House Umber is still loyal to House Stark. Don't you remember your oaths, Cor Stark? Mors added savagely. The boy is about to be destroyed by the Lannisters, and he's set aside his northern lords to marry a southern. Is that the king you want? Arnulf argued. I've seen the woman in the north. I'd take a southern too. Hother said dismissively.
Aye, I bet you would, Horsebane.
Arnulf snapped, taking a jab at Hother's nickname. He had earned it when he had been at the Citadel in Old Town training to be a maester. He had gutted a whore who had tried to rob him, though the story is not talked about around Hother because the whore had apparently been a man. Hother staggered to his feet, his hand going to the knife at his side, but Arthur stepped forward, half drawing his sword. Careful, old man, the young warrior snarled. We come under a banner of peace. Mors put a hand on his brother's arm and pulled him back down into his seat as he got to his feet, walking around the table till he was chest to chest with the Karstark lad. Mors towered over the boy, his good eye glaring down at him. Mars was a fearsome man, one-eyed, massive, and garbed in a cloak of a snow bear, with its head as his hood. He did not need armor nor weapons to look dangerous. He had killed the crow who had taken his eye by biting its bloody head off. This boy playing at war did not scare him. Watch yourself, boy, Mors warned. I dislike oathbreakers, but Rickard Karstark despises them. I wonder what he'll do to you when he gets his hands on you. Rickard won't touch us. Arnulf scowled. Bolton will make sure of that. Hother chuckled darkly. If you believe that, then you're more of a bloody fool than we thought. Bolton cares about nothing, and nobody. You are nothing to him. Arthur looked between Mors and Hother, before smartly taking a step back behind his father. Mors scowled under his bushy beard. Get the blazes out of our home, Mors growled. Arnulf bobbed his head and quickly left, his son hot on his heels. When they were gone, Mors turned to his brother. How much food is in the larders? 2 months' worth, Hodder answered. And men? 200 swords, another 50 bows, Hodder said. What will we do when we run out of food? Eat the bloody crows, Morris grumbled as he stormed out of the room.
Line break.
Tyrion, the last son of Theon Greyjoy, groaned in pain as he regained consciousness. There wasn't a part of his body that didn't hurt. His hands were a bloody mess, wrapped in blood-stained stripes of cloth. That's where the bastard had started before making his way to Theon's feet. Finally, there was a large splatter of red on the front of Theon's pants. The bastard himself was eating at a table in front of Theon, munching happily on fat, juicy sausages. He finally noticed that Theon was awake, a wide, cruel smile spreading across his face. "Hello there," he said excitedly. "How'd we sleep? What the hell did you do to me?" The Septon groaned, barely able to keep his head up. Ramsay regarded the sausage he had on his fork, wiggling it slightly. "The whores I had brought in, they gushed over the size of your cock. So I took it." The bastard of the Dreadfort had said it so casually that it took Theon a moment to realize what he said. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock and horror as his mouth tried to form words. "You did what?" he cried. Ramsay giggled madly. "I must say, the hounds loved it, almost as much as the whores loved it," he laughed. "Unfortunately for them, they couldn't fucking shut up about it, so we went for a little hunt. Reek had quite a lot of fun with them." Theon could barely breathe, his breath coming heavy and fast. He glared at the bastard. "You're a fucking madman," he managed to shout finally. "You're a dead man." Ramsay chuckled and stood up, grabbing a thin knife as he did. He strode over to Theon, gazing him up and down like a butcher with a newly slaughtered pig. "Oh, I don't know about that," Ramsay mused. "The fun is just about to begin." Robb. The men cheered as the men of the Riverlands trooped in, the Blackfish and the other lords of the Riverlands leading them. 12,000 men, 6,000 foot and cavalry, fresh and rested after their battle at the Twins. Robb couldn't help but feel relieved. As the reinforcements set up their camp, Robb met with his uncle and the others at the top of the hill, where their tents were added to the cluster. "Uncle," Robb said, clasping arms with the Blackfish, "it looks like you didn't lose too many men taking the crossing." "We got lucky, Your Grace," the Blackfish answered. "Jon found us a way to get on the other side of the river. We surprised the bastards in the eastern keep, while Hawker assaulted the western side." "How did Jon find a way across the Green Fork?" Robb asked curiously. The Blackfish shot Edmure with a dirty look before answering. "Edmure got drunk and told the Imp of a secret ford that is only known to the Tullys." Brendan explained. "Then the Imp got drunk and told Jon." "It was an accident," Edmure said weakly. Robb nodded. "Nevertheless, perhaps it was for the best. We could have lost a lot more men without that knowledge." "I see your own force has lost many men," the Blackfish commented grimly. "The lion had claws." "Desert snakes." Robb scowled. Sir Brendan raised an eyebrow. "So, the Dornish joined the Lannisters after all." "Bastards surprised us from the east when the Lannisters' center was moments from breaking," Robb explained. "I sent out the call to retreat almost immediately. There was no way we could have countered Tywin's trap. All our men were committed to the attack." "You saved more by getting them out of there," the Blackfish said, a knowing look in his eye. "No point in grumbling about it now. We live to fight another day." "Aye, and that's what we plan to do," Robb said, motioning for the group of Riverlords to follow him. "I refuse to run from Tywin again. We dig in and break the buggers here." Robb led them over to the eastern edge of the hill, overlooking what would soon be the battlefield. Men were hard at work digging trenches in the side of the hill under the supervision of Lucas Blackwood and several captains. Further down, Lord Forrester and Garland were mounted and watching as men dug more trenches and set up stakes. "It's not curtain walls, arrow slits, and a moat, but it will serve our purposes," Robb explained. While the rest of the lords spoke with one another about what they saw, the Blackfish stepped closer to Robb, dropping his voice so that only the Northern King could hear him. "How many men does Tywin have?" Sir Brendan whispered. "Some 30,000, Robb responded. "With Dornish make up a third of his number, and they're all mounted." "How many mounted men do we have?" 11,000 counting your men," Robb sighed. "Any tricks up the sleeve?" Robb shook his head. "Not this time, Uncle. We hold here. And if we can't, I have a system of riders set up between here, River Run, and Tarly's encampment at Casterly Rock. I also have another rider at River Run prepared to go north to Jon should things go ill here. He will watch out for Margaery and Tarly will finish what we started. The Blackfish patted Robb on the shoulder. Then we best not lose and get you back to your golden rose. I'd line break. My lords, welcome back, Robb said, nodding to the lords of the Riverlands. Your help is vitally important as you are well aware. What is our plan for Tywin, your grace? Lord Mallister asked, getting right to the point. We make his life hell, Robb said simply. Sarah Brynden and Garland will each hold the flank with the cavalry we have. The archers will be under Lord Blackwood. The infantry shall be under Lord Forrester. How far away is Tywin? Dedmir asked. He will reach our position tomorrow, Robb replied grimly. I will not mince words, my lords. We lost all of our advantages at Harrenhal when the Dornish cavalry blindsided us. We both boast some 30,000 men, though the Lannisters have the slight edge thanks to their new allies. Any word from Lord Tarly? Sir Donald asked. Robb nodded. Lord Tarly is marching east with 30,000 men, just under half of the force he took with him into the west, but he has yet to reach the Golden Tooth. We cannot rely on his help for this fight. The air seemed stale in the tent. When they had all been at River Run last, there had been so much energy in the air. Tarly took 80,000 men west to conquer Lancelsport and Casterly Rock. Jon Snow and the Blackfish had marched north to deal with the traitorous Freys and Boltons with the remaining strength of the North and Riverlands, some 30,000 foot and cavalry. That left Robb with 41,000 men to deal with Tywin Lannister and the last of his Wester men and his Crownlander allies. 35,000 men in all. The war would have been over in one fell swoop if Robb had not underestimated his opponent. Then again, not even the most learned Archmaester could have predicted an alliance between the Lions of Casterly Rock and the Princes of Sunspear. We all know the consequences of defeat, Robb said gravely. We best find our beds or a septon, whichever you prefer. The lords nodded and left. Garland waited behind so that he could speak with Robb, but the king in the north had disappeared as well. Robb strode out of the tent, Grey Wind at his heels as he swung his cloak over his shoulders. He was looking for one person. Olivar, Robb called when he finally caught sight of his squire. The young man jumped at Robb's voice. He was around a fire with a few more squires, all of which stood and bowed quickly to Robb as he approached. They were all munching on warmed, salted pork and bread from the cook's tent. Yes, your grace, Olivar asked, grabbing his cloak. Saddle my horse, Robb ordered, turning away before his squire had a chance to answer. The king in the north waited patiently while his squire readied his horse, gazing out over land below the hill. It was a clear, windless night. The stars and the moon shined from the heavens, barely illuminating the land. Where are you going, your grace? Olivar asked curiously, leading the horse away from the others. To consult the gods, Robb answered, hauling himself up onto the saddle. I will be back by morning. Should I find any of your guards? Olivar asked. Robb shook his head. Claw and Grey Wind are all I need. Plenty of time to die tomorrow. Robb clapped his heels into his mount and set off down the hill, Grey Wind easily matching the horse's pace. Olivar watched his king ride away, still wondering if he would ever understand the Northern King. Line break! Robb finished tying the reins of his horse to a sturdy branch before making his way towards the massive heart tree. His scouts had reported its existence in an ancient and crumbling holdfast left over from the era of the First Men. It was nearly as big as the heart tree in Winterfell. Robb fell to his knees before the tree, holding claw point down in his hands, as his head rested on his chest. He stayed that way for almost an hour, controlling his breathing and simply allowing himself to exist. I am unsure what to do, Robb said quietly, looking up and into the red, bleeding eyes that had been carved into the trunk of the tree. This is my first time facing failure like this, and without my father I am lost. Are you? A woman's voice chuckled. Robb's head snapped up. Who goes there? He asked, preparing to draw his sword. There is no need for that, nephew, a man's voice said. You are here to consult the gods for advice. We are the advisors. From behind the tree, two figures appeared, looking as real as any mortal people. Yet their voices sounded like they were speaking from far off. The man was tall and handsome, with long, dark hair and steel-gray eyes. He wore northern armor and had an odd scar around his throat. He wore a smirk beneath the stubble and had laugh lines around his eyes. He was obviously a man who smiled a lot, and his eyes twinkled with humor. The woman was beautiful, but not in the way Margaery was. Margaery was like a flower, delicate and pristine. This woman had a wild beauty to her. Like the man, she had long brown-black hair and steel-gray eyes. She was dressed in a simple gray dress, and her hair was pulled back in a loose and simply braid that frayed slightly, but that only added to her beauty. There was pride in the way she held herself. That was very similar to how Margaery held herself, but without the uncertainty that came with Margaery's age. The one thing that stood out was the blue rose that was tucked behind one of the woman's ears. "Nephew?" Robb muttered. They both looked like Starks. Then it clicked. "Uncle Brandon and Aunt Lyanna?" Lyanna smiled. "I was afraid that you would not recognize us," she said, her voice caring and kind. "We are happy to see you, Robb, though we are sad that we meet in such circumstances." "How are the old gods making this happen?" Robb asked. Brandon knocked against the tree. "The old gods do not have much power south of the neck, but where there is a weirwood, the old gods have some power." "Is my father with you?" Robb asked, hopefully. Lyanna and Brandon shared a look, with Lyanna shaking her head slightly, before answering Robb's question. "We do not have much time for questions, Robb. We must say what we came here to say. Then we must go. While the gods have power, it is limited this far south." Robb nodded, getting to his feet and sliding his sword back into his war belt. "Of course. Sorry." Brandon crossed his arms and leaned against the tree. "You fear that you might die tomorrow?" he said bluntly. "You fear that you have led yourself and your men to death." Robb nodded reluctantly. "All tactical wisdom points to returning to River Run, but I can't bring myself to run from Tywin again." "That is the wolf blood in your veins, Robb," Lyanna explained. "All Starks are blessed and cursed with it. For Brandon and myself, it led to our deaths. You are one of the few who is blessed with just the right amount. Just as Ned is." "Wolf blood is pride, though, isn't it?" Robb asked. "Wildness, in some cases," Brandon sighed. "For Ned it is shown in his determination and stubborn honor and honesty. It is too soon to say what it is for you, but it is clear that you have it in you, lad." "Will my men die because of it?" Robb asked. Lyanna shook her head. "We cannot tell you the future. Torrhen told you as much. What we can tell you is this. Do not give up on your men, not should you go into battle thinking that you will lose. Embrace death as a true warrior, a true wolf." Brandon continued. "Fight with your men, Robb, and take as many of the red bastards with you. Let the fates decide who lives and die." "And if I should die?" Robb asked, after a moment. "Then trust that your family is in good hands." Lyanna said with a smile. "There is a reason Ned left you to watch over Winterfell, and not another. There is a reason you gave Jon command of the Northern Army and not another. You never give up on family, and they will never give up on you." Robb nodded, absorbing everything that his aunt and uncle had said. After a while he looked back up, but they were gone. "Would my father be proud of me?" Robb asked, to the tree. "Yes." Brandon and Lyanna answered back. "Robb would." Robb stood in the grove of stumps, looking out over the Lannisters' army that was approaching. Once again, Tywin had his infantry and archers in the center with his cavalry on the flanks. However, this time Robb could see the Dornish cavalry that made up the Lannister right flank. On the opposite flank, the remaining Lannister and Crownlander cavalry, left over from the Battle of Harrenhal, marched casually by their infantry. Robb's weary host surrounded the massive hill, preparing as much as possible for a defensive fight. His infantry formed a shield wall at the base of the hill, with rows of stakes and a wide trench set before them to deter any cavalry charge. Standing a little higher up on the hill were Robb's archers. Lord Blackwood could be seen in the center of ranks of archers, his red armor sticking out amongst the leather-clad warriors. He was surrounded by several raven-cloaked warriors, each wielding a massive longbow. They were the best shots Raventree Hall had to offer, and Robb was lucky to have them. On either side of the hill were Robb's cavalry. On his right, the Blackfish commanded the Riverlander cavalry, 6,000 strong, while Garland commanded the remaining 5,000 lancers from the Reach and Stormlands. Robb hoped that each flank would be able to hold, though he was not sure how he was going to be able to win this battle. Their backs were against the wall, or hill, as it were. Robb's men had done a spectacular job with the defenses. Then again, he expected nothing less. Every man under the Stark banner knew that this could potentially be their final battle. The odds were against them, and they were determined to go down with a fight and take as many of the Scarlet Bastards with them. Robb was surrounded by his remaining battle guard, who were all mounted. Robb was the only one who wasn't. His horse was nearby, being held by Olyvar. Greywind sat at his feet. The young squire looked fearful at the Lannister host, but in the company of older and more seasoned warriors like Balon Swan and Roland Storm, he tried not to show it. Robb knew that his squire was still getting over the death of his brother Perwyn, who would help the young man with his sword work every night after dinner. "Fuck this," Robb muttered, walking over to his horse and hauling himself into the saddle. "Stay here," he ordered his guard, before riding down the hill. Robb's sudden order caught his protectors off guard, but they obeyed him, watching as he rode down the hill past the archers and into the massed ranks of his footmen, many of which looked shocked that their king had suddenly appeared. "Men," Robb bellowed, a lone rider in a sea of spear and shield. "Listen to me!" Robb's voice could be clearly heard all the way up the hill, and probably even to his cavalry. No one dared speak, not even the enemy, who could no doubt hear the young wolf speaking to his men. The men around him drew back a little. During the last battle, Robb had stayed back and had controlled the battle from behind the vanguard. Now he was a few meters from the front ranks, looking fearsome in his armor and crown, the dire wolf by his side, and the wolf pelt cloak over his shoulders, clear reminders of his title. The young wolf. "We came south to rescue my father. When he died, we fought to avenge him. Those bastards," he cried, drawing his sword and pointing it at the Lannister host, "want me dead. Well, if they want my head, then let's see them try and take it. I'm right here," he roared, standing in his stirrups and opening his arms wide. Robb's words had stirred his men into a frenzy, as they realized that their king would be here in the battle line with them. Almost as one, the infantry drew ranks around Robb, forming an impenetrable line of flesh, metal, and leather. "No surrender," Robb bellowed. "No surrender. No surrender. No surrender." The men cheered, taking up the chant, till it was ringing around the hill, from the infantry to the archers to the cavalry. Every last one of Robb's 28,000 troops were screaming in defiance. They would not surrender. Not to the old lion, and certainly not to Joffrey fucking Baratheon. Robb was glaring at the enemy when the sound of pounding feet made him look around. Behind him, his guard, all on foot, entered the infantry host, and pushed their way in front of Robb, adding yet another wall of armored flesh to the ranks of footmen. They looked out of place, steel-plate armored warriors amongst chainmail and leather. "You wanted to leave us out of the fun," Daisy joked, looking up at Robb. Robb raised an eyebrow. "I ordered you to stay put," he said, though not angry that his friends were beside him. "The North knows no king but one named Stark," Daisy replied firmly, her words earning a growl of agreement from those around her. Robb couldn't help but smile fiercely. He strapped his shield to his arm, moving it around to make sure his shoulders and arms were loose for the battle ahead. As always, he wore no helm, just his northern crown. "Let's give these bastards a fight," he roared. Line break. Tywin watched impassively as the Stark boy gave his speech. It was a pretty speech, but it would not help the boy today. Baelish and the Knights of the Vale were close by, according to the scouts. The old lion was slightly annoyed. He was looking forward to the challenge of defeating the Northern King, but the boy had made it almost too easy. Just like at Harrenhal, Stark and his men would be wiped away by Tywin's allies. "Send word to Lord Marbrand to advance the front," Tywin ordered. The messenger hesitated. "My lord, the stakes entrench." Tyrion turned his emerald glare on the younger man, who visibly flinched and galloped off to give the order to Marbrand. It was a skill that the old lion had perfected over the years. A look that could make many men think twice before not speaking again. "Send word to Brax as well," Tywin said, not looking over his shoulder at the cluster of riders. "He's not to hold anything back. The Stark boy has dug in," Banefort grumbled. "Were you expecting anything different?" Tywin asked, glancing at his bannerman. The older man shook his head. "No, but it is surprising, is it not? The lengths he's gone?" Tywin scowled. "It will not keep him safe for long." Once Kevin or Oberyn break the boy's flanks, they will sweep in and encircle the boy. The two Westermen watched as the infantry, a great block of red and gold, trooped forward as the archers rained arrows down on the enemy. But just like Harrenhal, the men of the Stormlands seemed unaffected, simply raising their shields and creating a shell of wood and metal against the deadly rain. After an hour, horns went up and down the line as footmen began to move forward, keeping their shields up as they traversed the stakes. When they reached the trench, many of the men with spears reversed their grip and hurled them into the packed ranks of the northern army, before drawing their swords and leaping across the trench. More and more Lannister warriors leaped over the trench, joining the fray and slowly pushing the enemy back, establishing a firm foothold. Tywin suppressed a smirk. He would end the Stark boy here, and cement his family's legacy as rulers of Westeros. Line break. Robb cursed as the Westermen literally threw themselves at his men, jumping over the trench after softening his front with spears and arrows. The young wolf had hoped that the enemy would be arrogant and stupid. He was wrong. They were ready to fight and end Robb's reign here and today. "Hold," Robb shouted over the sound of battle. "We will not waver. We will not surrender." "No surrender!" his men cried, fighting with renewed fury. Robb took the time to check his flanks. Tywin had brought his cavalry down on the Blackfish, trying to pull them out of position, but the old knight had a firm command over his men. Tywin was going to have to commit and forcefully move Robb's men if he wanted to encircle the infantry. On Garland's flank, Robb wasn't sure what was happening. The Dornish cavalry, which outnumbered Garland's men by almost 2-1, was only lightly engaged with their opponent. Robb didn't know what the purpose was. The Dornish commander was trying to pull Garland out of position, nor was he throwing waves of men at Garland. It looked like he was trying to preserve his men. "Your Grace!" Brienne shouted as she threw herself into the enemy that was working towards Robb's position. Tywin had come up with a plan to attack Robb's position. He had dismounted a company of his knights and forced them to the front lines, where they were carving back the less skilled and less armored infantrymen, like a hot knife through butter. The plan had worked, and there was now a wedge that led directly to the Northern King. The only thing keeping them from Robb was his battle guard and his last line of infantry still around him. Robb mentally kicked himself into action as his sword flashed down, striking at the first enemy he saw, a knight from House Lannister. Claws struck against the man's sword, leaving a deep notch in the blade. Robb struck again, which the man tried to counter with his shield, noticing what the young wolf's sword had done to his own. Claw carved into the shield, like it was nothing more than parchment, and finally bit into something more solid, the knight's hand. The man cried out in pain, as half of his hand was lopped off. But he didn't feel the pain for long, as Robb put his blade through the man's chest, not watching as the man crumpled to the ground, his blood leaking out of his chest and adding to the muddy ground. Robb continued forward, striking down knights left and right, a single mounted figure in a mass of bodies. Unbeknownst to Robb and his guard, they had formed a wedge of their own, and were driving back into the enemy ranks, scattering Tywin's company of knights and rallying Robb's men, who had been close to breaking. Line break. Tywin. The old lion scowled as his knights were pushed back. The Stark boy had managed to rally his men, along with a group of very skilled warriors, and around him, and had formed their own wedge to counter Tywin. Now the battle was back on even footing. "We could send another company of knights," Bainefort offered. Tywin shook his head. "Kevin needs them for the Blackfish." "Have you noticed our other flank?" Bainefort asked, staring to the north, where the Dornish was barely engaged with the enemy. "What the blazes is the man doing?" "Send word to Prince Oberyn that he is to commit all his forces to routing Tyro." Tywin barked at a messenger. "Will he listen?" Bainefort asked curiously. "If he does not, I will have you take over," Tywin answered grimly. "Martell is up to something, and I like it not." "He's our ally," Bainefort grumbled. "What the hell could he be up to?" "I'm no fool, Quentin," Tywin snapped irritably. "The Red Viper is not here to help me. He is here for something else. Keep a close eye on him. If he attempts to retreat, turn the archers on him." Lord Bainefort blanched, but nodded. "Aye, my lord." The older men watched the battle continue. Marbrand's infantry had managed to stop retreating, and the two forces were now pressed in a battle of wills, as men switched from swords and spears to daggers and fists. It was chaos, but at the center of it all, surrounded by blood-soaked warriors who were cutting down all in their paths, was the young wolf himself, dealing death with every swing of his blade. Valyrian steel, Tywin muttered, watching as Stark's blade slides through the corner of a shield and into a knight's breastplate. Normal steel was not capable of something like that, unless it was wielded by a man like the Mountain. My lord, Baneford asked. The Stark boy has a Valyrian blade. Tywin hissed. I thought ice was in King's Landing. It is. Ned Stark head was taken with it. Tywin agreed. He's gotten his hands on another. He and his protectors need to be taken care of. The old lion looked over his shoulder. Get me Clegane. My lord, Baneford cried, pointing at the battle. Stark is down. Tywin's head snapped over, watching as the boy's horse reared, a spear sticking out from its chest, and toppled over, bringing the Northern King with it. He could be wounded or even killed. Get me the Mountain now, Tywin barked. Line break, Robb. Robb landed heavily on the ground that was a cesspit of mud, blood, and bodies. Fortunately, he was only there for a couple of moments before many hands grabbed him by the shoulders and arms and pulled him back to his feet. If you go down, my lord, we're well and truly fucked. One man said grimly. He wore northern armor and swung a broadsword in one hand, while the other held a shield emblazoned with the symbol of his house, a black tree with a sword in the middle. House Forrester. Lord Gregor, Robb asked. The man was a little taller than Robb, and more than a few years older. His hair and beard were peppered with silvery gray, but the Lord of Ironrath looked just as strong and fierce as ever. The older lord smiled slightly. Your Grace, I do not believe we have much time to talk, he said, moving past Robb as he engaged two of the enemy, striking both down with devastating speed and power. Robb brought himself back to reality and stepped up to fight beside the Lord of Ironrath, the two Northmen striking down any man that dared come across them. Robb's guards, who had lost him briefly when his horse went down, soon found him and closed ranks around their king, fighting shoulder to shoulder. They fought for what seemed like hours, never allowed respite as the pile of dead mounted in front of them. Robb would say that, at that moment, he had the best fighters in Westeros at his side. Brienne fought with unstoppable fury and was Robb's constant companion as she cut down anyone that tried to get behind the Northern King. Daisy and Smalljon fought back to back, the two Northerners fighting with a berserker rage, as they hacked and smashed the enemy into oblivion. The rest of Robb's guard, skilled knights one and all, continued to fight and prove that they were not only skilled on the tourney fields, but very deadly on the battlefield, as well. Greywind bounded in wherever he could, mauling the enemy. The direwolf was the size of a pony, and 10 times more deadly. His teeth should crunch armor and take a man's arm off whole. The Lannister line seemed close to breaking, but then a monstrously tall man stepped forward, his massive chest heaving under the largest set of plate armor that Robb had ever seen. His sword was nearly the height of Robb himself, and the man wielded it with one hand, while the other held an alarmingly thick shield in the other. It was painted with the 3 black dogs on a field of yellow of House Clegane. Tywin had sent the Mountain after Robb. The giant simply bellowed and swung his sword at Robb, picking out the Northern King through the slits in his helm. Robb jumped back, just barely avoiding the enormous blade as it passed through where he had just been standing. Now his guard joined the fight, ganging up on the terrifying knight. Rolland Storm and Balon Storm encircled the man, shouting at him, trying to get his attention, attacking him from the sides, while Brienne took on the monstrous man head-on. The beauty of Tartas was by no means a small woman, but she looked diminutive compared to the man. Brienne was smart and did not try to battle the man's strength for strength. She seemed to dance on her feet, looking almost like she was ready to jump as she evaded the gigantic blade, attacking where she could. The Mountain grunted, his breathing labored, as he attacked. The man almost seemed to be swaying where he stood. Brienne noticed this and tried to move around more, luring the beastly man away from Robb. The Northern King grunted as he forced himself forward, sliding past Sir Balon and burying his sword in the back of the giant's knee, putting all his strength into the strike. Gregor Clegane was decked almost head to toe in steel armor, reinforced with boiled leather and chainmail, but the back of his knee was a weak point that Robb had exploited. The knight bellowed in pain as he dropped to one knee, almost trying to will himself back up so that he could continue the fight, but he had no chance. Sir Balon stepped forward and swung his morning star and rained blow after blow into the Mountain's helm, battering the metal into an almost unrecognizable shape until the knight fell over unconscious. Line break, Tarwin. Impossible. Gregor Clegane. The Mountain, his mad dog, had just been defeated. If Tywin hadn't seen it in person, then he would have had the messenger's tongue cut out just for saying such a thing. Clegane was a nigh invincible beast that Tywin kept a leash on at all times. He should never have been defeated. It was the Stark boy and his protectors, that damn and blasted group of warriors that had been fighting on the front lines and had kept the tide from turning in Tywin's favor. While 3 of the fighters had distracted Clegane, the Stark boy had stepped forward and shoved his Valyrian steel blade into the Mountain's knee, crippling the knight while others had worked to knock him unconscious. Now his front line was slowly edging away from the fight as they saw their best warrior be bested. "Send in the reserves." Tywin barked at a messenger, who nodded and galloped off in the face of his lord's fury. Tywin looked to the right and held in a roar of fury. The Dornish cavalry had deserted him, and now the Tyrell cavalry was pulling back. Tywin knew what they were doing. The Tyrell commander would pull his men around the hill and hit Kevin's cavalry while they were firmly engaged with the Blackfish. The Lion of Casterly Rock swore then and there that he would see Oberyn Martell killed for his cowardice, and Sunspear burnt to a crisp. A Lannister always pays his debts. "My lord, look!" someone shouted, forcing Tywin to look further north. Thousands of mounted men were cantering forward, their armor and lances gleaming in the sunlight. Their banners snapped in the wind, depicting runes, red forts, broken wheels, and so many more. Most prominent among them was the Falcon and the Moon, the sigil of House Arryn. Baelish. Good. The Knights of the Vale would sweep away Stark's army, just as the Dornish had done at Harrenhal. Horns sounded from the Valemen as they began to charge, lowering their lances and bellowing their war cries. Armored in steel plate on massive chargers, the Knights of the Vale were a fearsome sight to behold, and hit their enemy like an unstoppable wave of steel and death. That wave slammed into Tywin's infantry, and didn't even seem to slow down as they mowed down the red-clad men. It was almost despicable how easily the knights were cutting through the western men, like a scythe through wheat. "Sound the general retreat," Tywin gritted out, turning his horse around. "My lord, what about our men?" one of Tywin's knights asked stupidly. The old lord backhanded the man. "We retreat to King's Landing," Tywin repeated before riding off, anger radiating off of him. Line break. Robb, like an unstoppable wave. Steel-clad riders appeared from Robb's left and stormed over the entire Lannister line, the massive warhorses ragdolling footmen aside while their riders skewered anyone in sight. Robb lifted his sword and cheered as he watched the Lancaster force be swept aside, their lines crumbling under the onslaught of riders. His men followed suit, enjoying the sight of their enemy being slaughtered. They remembered how the Dornish cavalry had swept many of their friends and comrades into the God's Eye, and they were elated to see tables turned on the Lancasters. "Your Grace," Brienne said, pointing her sword towards the right flank. The Lannister cavalry was retreating as well. Garland had wheeled his force around the hill and had pinched the Lannister host between himself and the Blackfish. The 2 Stark forces combining to push back the now shattered and broken Lannister knights. "We've won," Robb said tiredly, planting claw point down in the mud, leaning over slightly as he took a deep breath. "Don't put your blade down just yet, your grace," someone called fiercely. As the Knights of the Vale continued to drive the Lannister host away, now helped by Garland and the Blackfish, 2 riders trotted forward. The man who had spoken was a massive warrior, wearing bronze armor, engraved with runes. His helm was open, revealing an older, gray-haired man. But Yohn Royce, otherwise known as Bronze Yohn for the armor he wore, carried himself like a man half his age. The Lord of Runestone was a man Robb's father had always spoken about, with the highest respect. The 2 becoming close friends when Ned Stark was a ward for Jon Arryn. Robb Stark vaguely remembered meeting the man when he came north to take his son to Castle Black. Robb had thought that the man was the biggest man he had ever met, and the feeling still remained. The only man who could compare was the Greyjoy. The second man was far younger than the Vale Lord. He was a tall, muscular, sandy-haired youth, who wore a sigil that confused Robb. On parts of the tabard, there was the Falcon of House Arryn. On others it was a sigil that he had never seen before. But the young man looked pleasant enough. Robb had never met the late Jon Arryn, but according to Maester Luwin, the Arryns usually had blonde hair and clear blue eyes. The young warrior certainly matched the description. The only Arryn boy that Robb knew about his cousin Robin, his Aunt Lysa's son. Robb nodded slightly. Lord Jon Royce, I have never been happier to see another man in my life. The two men dismounted and kneeled in the mud before Robb. Your Grace, please forgive us for taking so long to act. The younger man apologized. Robb raised an eyebrow. I am sorry, sir, but I do not know who you are.
I am Harold Arryn, once Harold Harding.
The young man explained, grandson to Jon Arryn's sister, and now Lord of the Vale. Robb nodded slowly. I see. Well, I am greatly pleased to see you both. Your timing is impeccable. Please, rise. The two men stood. Your Grace, we have brought 10,000 riders with us. While the rest of our host, 20,000 strong, marches to take Harrenhal, cutting Tywin off from finding sanctuary in the ruins. Yoan said strongly. Robb smiled. That is excellent news, my lords, Robb said, planting claw more firmly into the ground, and stepping forward, grasping arms with Harold, and then Jon. We will regather ourselves here for the time before marching on to join our new allies at Harrenhal, Robb instructed. Then we march on King's Landing and Joffrey. Line break. Oberyn. You did well, Obara. Oberyn praised as he and his host of mounted warriors rode south towards the Stony Septon. They would camp there before heading east toward King's Landing, which would hopefully be in the hands of Oberyn's new friends. The Dornish prince never traveled much without his daughters, or the Sand Snakes, as they were known in Dorne. While with the men of the Westerlands, he had disguised the 3 girls he had taken with him as simply cavalrymen, but they were far more dangerous than that. Oberyn's eldest bastard, wielded a spear nearly as well as he did. Nearly. Nymeria, the second eldest, had no less than a dozen daggers hidden on her person, and could produce and throw one in seconds. The third and final daughter that Oberyn had brought with him was Tywin, who looked far different from her sisters, with her fair skin, blue eyes, and golden hair. Her weapon of choice was poisons. She had been the one that had poisoned the mountain the night before the battle. To protect his daughters during the battle at High Heart, he had dispersed them to the north, east, and south, to watch for any reinforcements riding to Stark's aid. Albara, who had been to the north, had been the one to bring word about the Knights of the Vale. Albaran and his men had slipped away when all eyes had been on the mountain's fight with the Northern King and his protectors. Oberyn would be the first to admit. He was quite annoyed that Tywin had sent his rapist dog against the Stark boy. With the Valemen entering the fray, no doubt on the Stark side, he had been hoping to intercept and cut down Tywin and his men as they treated, capturing the mountain himself in the process. Now the beast was in the hands of the Starks. I do not feel right running, father, Obara grumbled. She did not possess the beauty that many of Oberyn's bastards had, but she was by far the most skilled as a warrior. We will give the young dragon his time in the sun. Oberyn shrugged. He and his mentor shall deal with Tywin while his aunt takes the capital. Everything is still as it should be. What about the Stark boy, father? Nymeria asked curiously. A problem for their graces, Oberyn answered, waving aside his daughter's worry. The true threat has been eliminated. Robb Stark will be much easier to deal with. At the table or the battlefield? Tywin asked. We have dragons, my dear, Oberyn said with a savage smile. If the boy is smart, he will meet us at the table. If he is stupid, well, we shall do our best to remake the field of fire. John 19. The small fleet of boats moved forward at an excruciatingly slow pace, but for good reason. The rowers knew exactly what they were doing and had made it very clear to Jon and his men that they would have to move slow to stay quiet. There were 3 boats in total, each with 3 warriors and 2 rowers. They would land on the north end of the moat and would have to scale the walls to get in. The Greyjoy had promised that he was more than capable of the feat, but Jon would believe it when he saw it. They had embarked a few hours before midnight so that they could make it through the swamp, and be on the north end by the time Lord Hawker started his attack in the early morning. That had been a suggestion that the Lord of Eagle's Roost had made himself, claiming, if they fuckers are 30, let's have them be tired as well. Jon looked over his shoulder where Lord Hawker's men had lit up the southern end like a piece of the sun had landed on Earth. The battle cries and the banging of weapons on shields were also annoyingly loud. There was no chance that anyone inside the stronghold could ignore it. Finally, Jon felt the bottom of the boat hit firm land. Let's go, Jon called softly, his eyes already accustomed to the darkness. The 9 warriors quickly disembarked and began to make their way towards the ruined curtain wall, crouching and keeping their weapons sheathed as they did. They weren't sure how many men were still on the northern walls, but it was better to be safe than sorry. 2 of the Cranabon came with them, each carrying a length of a rope attached to an iron grapple that was wrapped with cloth. It would muffle the sound of metal against stone. Without an order from Jon, they twirled the grapples in their hands, building momentum before tossing them up the wall. As usual, the Cranagman did not miss or have to cast a second time. The one nearest to Jon tugged on the rope and handed it to Jon. "All set, my lord. Remember, one at a time," he said quietly, glancing at the Greyjoy, "especially for that one." The Greyjoy grinned, his white teeth glowing like stars through his beard. Cheeky bugger. With agility belaying his age and physique, the Lord of Last Hearth grabbed the rope, leaning his weight against it, before slowly placing one boot on the wall. When he felt sure that the rope would hold him, he began to climb, slowly and confidently, up the wall. When he reached the top, he stopped, peered over the top, and then clambered over. His face then reappeared over the top, still grinning wildly. "Told ya." Jon shook his head, but couldn't help but smile before he too climbed up the wall. Small Jon climbing the opposite rope. None of them had any plate armor on, just boiled leather and chainmail. Plate mail would have been too heavy for even the Greyjoy to wear while climbing the wall. When Jon reached the top of the wall, he scrambled the last bit and landed as lightly as he could on the battlements, drawing his sword as he did. The entire northern wall was undefended and completely abandoned. All the Frey soldiers were on the southern wall, firing down as Jon's men marched forward with one of the rams that Lord Hawker had ordered constructed. It took a few more moments for the others to get on the wall. Jon had his eyes trained on the battle the entire time, waiting for the right moment to strike. The Greyjoy knelt right beside him, his eyes narrowed and focused. "We'll hit the Drunkard's Tower and clear it out," Jon whispered to the big lord. "We should be able to join Hawker's men in the gatehouse after." The Greyjoy nodded and drew his massive blade from the sheath on his back. Jon glanced behind him, making sure that the others were ready before he set off at a slow, steady pace towards the leaning tower, his eyes flickering between the battle in front of the gatehouse and the entrance to the tower. For once Jon felt the need to have a shield on him. If any of the archers turned, they would surely see Jon and his group. Then they would all be fucked, because only Roderick Wendell Manderly and Eddard Stark had shields. Even then, their shields couldn't protect their whole bodies against a dozen archers firing at them. Jon's worries were put to rest when they reached the tower, taking them out of sight of the archers on the gatehouse. The White Wolf gently pressed against the door, increasing the force to test if it was locked or not. Unsurprisingly, the door swung open. The Freys had no reason to worry about anyone appearing from the northern walls, and so had no reason to lock a potential escape route. Jon stepped inside and looked up. From the sounds of feet on wood, there was no telling how many men were on each floor. He looked behind him, holding a finger to his lips as he climbed the stairs, reaching the first door that was wide open. The Frey closest to the door was the first to die as Jon put his sword through the man's back, covering his mouth as life left the man. The half a dozen archers on the floor were quickly taken care of as Jon's men spread out and took care of them, following Jon's model and covered their mouths as they killed them. Except for the Greyjoy, he just lopped off the man's head with one swing of his sword. Jon strode towards the arrow slit and looked out. The ram was working on battering down, but arrows were still flying from all 3 towers and bodies littered the walkway and the swamps around it. "Unlock the door we came through," Jon ordered, keeping his voice low. "We have more floors to go. No one goes up alone. Understood?" The northern warriors nodded firmly. "Try to keep the kills quiet. If not, then we knew we're in for a fucking fight," Jon said with a grim smile before going up the next flight of stairs, his adrenaline settled now that he had gotten his blade wet. The next floor went almost as well as the first one did. 5 of the 6 archers were killed without a sound, but Brandon hacked off one man's leg, causing the archer to cry in pain before half of his head was taken off. "Great job, Forbrain," Ian hissed at his brother, as the sound of footsteps could be heard on the steps. One leather-clad man came running down the steps, stopping in his tracks as he took in the 9 northerners. "Intruders," he bellowed before Ian put an arrow through the man's throat. But it was too late. "Hold the base of the steps," Jon cried as more men came running down the steps. The first one to touch the floor was cut down by Jon, while the man behind him had the misfortune of coming face to face with the Greyjoy. He lost an arm before he was thrown by the big lord behind the fighting, where he met Darren Hornwood and was stabbed in the chest by the heir of Hornwood. More and more Frees came running down the steps as the higher floors were told, but Jon and the Great Jon held the line, cutting anyone they could and throwing those they couldn't behind them into the waiting swords of their companions. A few of the smarter buggers brought their bows with them, but Iron Hawker made sure that those men went down before they could even reach for their quivers. Jon and the Great Jon held the base of the steps for another half hour before they were replaced by Wendell Manderly and Brandon Hawker, who kept the process up. After another half hour, they were replaced by Eddard Stark and Darren Hornwood. Owen Norrie and Roderick Forrester were ready to take over whenever needed. Ian Hawker kept firing away at the enemy, now using the arrows of the downed Freys. Jon moved over to one of the windows and glanced out. The ram had broken through the gate, and now the Northern horse led by Megan Mormont was flooding in. The battle would soon be over. Jon turned back to the battle at the steps, as the Great Jon pulled a body back behind the fighting. The fur and iron armor identified the warrior as Owen Norrie. "Owen," Jon said, kneeling beside the dying man. The young clansman grinned up at Jon, blood in his teeth as one hand held his stomach where he had been stabbed. "It's been an honor, White Wolf," he said before the light left his eyes and his body went slack. Jon sighed and got back on his feet, getting next to the Great Jon. "Hawker's through the gate. You think we can finish the fight here without any help?" The large lord grinned wildly. "Follow me and try not to get hit," he ordered as he charged forward, his large sword sweeping back and forth like a scythe, clearing all the men from the steps in a matter of moments as he continued his mad charge. A bellowing roar came unending from his throat. Jon was at his back, cutting down anyone who got behind the large lord. He gestured for the others to follow. "Come on, for the north." "For the north," the others cheered as they followed Jon and the Great Jon. After fighting on the steps for nearly 2 hours on the steps between the second and third floor, most of the other floors had only a few men. The Great Jon led the group the entire time, which had to be a terrifying sight for the Freys. A mountain of a man soaked from head to toe in blood and gore, wielding a sword bigger than most men. Jon understood why Northmen were regarded as savages after catching sight of the faces of the archers before they were slaughtered by a berserk Great Jon. When the group of Northerners reached the final floor, Jon allowed the others to take care of the last of the archers. As he looked out over the gatehouse, Jon caught sight of one man in the middle of the Frey defenders, who were desperately trying to stave off the sieging Northmen at the top of the tower. The man wore plate armor and wore the sigil of House Frey on his tabard. He was surrounded by another half a dozen men, all wearing variations of the armor, but was obvious that he was in charge. That was the man known as Blackwalder. "You," Jon called, as the others cheered and embraced each other after the final man had been killed. The archer jogged over to Jon, a curious look on his face. Jon pointed towards the enemy commander. Can you hit him?" Ian shrugged and nudged Jon out of the way. He stuck his free hand out of the window before drawing an arrow and taking aim at the commander. Jon watched quietly, not wanting to interrupt or distract the warrior, while Ian loosed the arrow, lowering his bow after the arrow was on its way. Both he and Jon watched as the man in the middle of the ragged circle of defenders cried out and fell, an arrow appearing in his knee. "You didn't kill him," Jon commented. Ian looked at him, holding an arrow. "Freys are bad at 3 things, Jon. Loyalty, fighting, and making arrows. I'd be better off with sharpened sticks." Jon chuckled and turned back to the others. "Let's get down there and finish the fight." "Line break." Jon looked out from the battlements as the surviving Freys were rounded up and stripped of weapons and armor. There weren't more than 100 of them left. According to one of the Frey boys, who was squire to Blackwalder, around 500 men had died because of the poisoned water. The remaining defenders, those who had been deemed well enough to fight, were spread out between the 3 towers, which were about 1,200 men in total. Many of those who couldn't fight died during the battle, succumbing to the poison. Lord Glover found their bodies, and now mass graves were being dug about half a mile south of Moat Cailin, where all the Frey bodies could be buried. Jon had already ordered that the army would spend 2 days at the moat and send out riders to White Harbor before marching out. They lost 2,000 footmen during the battle, mainly from the archer fire from the 3 towers, but that's a lot less than if the northern host had attacked the moat with a healthy garrison. Not a bad fight. Lord Reed said quickly as he walked up to Jon. Unlike many of the northern lords, the Lord of Greywater Watch did not have a speck of blood on him. "Heard you and the Great Jon took out the drunkard's tower, had about 300 men in it, probably saves twice that number of Northmen. Aye, so I've heard. Jon replied, you know we only won this battle because of you and your men. Howland shrugged, leaning against the battlements. We would have taken the castle, regardless. But we would have lost another 3,000 or more men in the process. Jon countered, I will write to Robb and let him know that you deserve credit for the taking of the moats. Though Howland shook his head. Don't, it's quite all right. The history books will mark this down as the moment where the White Wolf, brother of the Young Wolf, began his campaign in the north that saw it freed of Ironborn and traitors. I don't want to be in the history books, Jon said stubbornly. Howland chuckled. Tough luck, lad. Your name became etched in history, the moment you were put in command of this army. When this war is over, who do you think is going to be spoken about? Lord Rowan? What about Lord Swan's son? How about Lord Forrester? The wiry lord shook his head. No, the history books will focus on 4 men. Robb Stark, obviously, Randyll Tarly and his assault on Casterly Rock, the Blackfish, and you. Jon sighed, dropping the argument. When I was a boy, I asked my father who his most dangerous bannerman was. The Grecian had just visited, and you can imagine my first thoughts of the man. He didn't say the Umbers or the Boltons. He said Howland Reed. I told Robb this, and we were both very confused. Jon turned and looked at the Northerner. I'm not anymore. Howland smiled slightly, nodding back to Jon. I appreciate that. So you have Moat Cailin. What's your next step? I already had a rider sent ahead to White Harbor. With any luck, the Manderleys wouldn't have turned their cloaks and will be able to send reinforcements. Jon explained. I and Lord Umber will take half of our force, a little under 5,000 men, and march east towards the Dreadfort. Lord Hawker and Lady Mormont will take the other half and march west to relieve Eagle's Roost. Put down the Dustins and Restwells before moving on to retake Deepwood Motte. What about Torrhen Square? Howland asked. Jon cursed internally. He had forgotten about Torrhen Square. That's where Theon Greyjoy was apparently. It would take a good force to clear out the raiders. Don't worry about it, lad. Howland said gently. The Carrions moved out already. Jon raised an eyebrow. He's gone? Howland nodded. He and most of the Ironborn are gone from the north. There are a few raiding ships still huddled around the stony shore, but other than Asha Greyjoy at Deepwood, the north is free of the Ironborn. Jon felt a smile of relief spread across his face as he heard the news. He now only had 10,000 Northmen and he had been worrying himself for days, wondering how he was going to deal with both the Boltons and the Ironborn. The traitors could muster about 5,000 to 7,000 men according to the other northern lords, but the Ironborn had another 10,000 raiders. Now Jon had Bolton alone. Wait, where have they gone? Jon asked. Howland shrugged. Not sure. My best guess is that they saw a lot of armed men marching north and left in search of elsewhere to raid. Probably the Reach since the Westerlands are due to fall soon. We'll have to send a rider to Riverrun, warning Margery, Jon said. I believe Robb left a host of 10,000 there, but it's near Tumbleton and nowhere near the coast. Howland nodded. I'll get on it, he promised. Oh, I should also let you know that my friends have said that the Company of the Rose is due to land in the north any day now. Jon's heart sank. After hearing about the Ironborn pulling back, he had been overjoyed. The reason a mercenary company was landing in the north was because Rose Bolton had paid them to fight for him. How many men? Jon asked. Around 4,000, I believe, Howland answered, not sounding the least bit concerned. Remember your history, Jon. And with that, Howland walked away, leaving Jon more confused and worried than he had been at the start of their discussion.